Just 1 week into hurricane season, there are already some big changes at the National Hurricane Center. Hurricane Center Director Ken Graham is leaving to become Director of the National Weather Service. The move is effective as of today. Graham has led the Hurricane Center since 2018. Jamie Rome is the new deputy, or he has been the Deputy Director of the Hurricane Center, and will now be the acting director until a permanent one can be named.
Well, we've got two areas that we're keeping our eye on. In the Eastern Pacific, we still have our tropical storm out here, Celia, and then into the Atlantic, we've got a new area to watch. Remember that tropical wave we told you about yesterday on Storm Center? Well, now it's got a possibility that that could develop into something down the line. We'll get to that in a second, but let's start out with what we know right now with Tropical Storm Celia. Slow but steady on the intensification of this tropical storm. Maximum winds now 50 miles per hour. It's moving west-northwest, so it's going to be bringing some big swells to parts of Mexico. That's really the only big issue. This is pushing in a westerly direction, still expected to strengthen over the next couple of days and become a hurricane, and then just eventually fade out and weaken as it moves into cooler waters as it progresses farther off towards the west. All right, let's talk about what's going on here now off the coast of Africa. This is a tropical wave, just a little disturbance that comes off here, and this is typical this time of the year. And now the National Hurricane Center is giving it a 20% chance of becoming a named storm. The next name on the list, by the way, is Bonnie. So if it gets a name, that would be it. But it's moving into an environment the next day or two that's a little hostile. So this development isn't going to happen really soon. It's more in the 3 to 5 day period where that's a little bit more likely, because out there, that's where we have sea surface temperatures that are still above average, and the wind shear is a little bit lighter. So this map shows you the sea surface temperature departures. So if you see this kind of goldish, reddish, orangish color, that means sea surface temperatures are above average of what we would typically expect for this time of the year. So not a big shock to see those really warm water temperatures. Now let's follow this moisture down the line. This is the Euro model, and we're watching the area of vorticity and the surge of moisture that's going to go along with it. And you can see it's going to be working its way westward all the way across the Atlantic. If you have interest into the Lesser Antilles, you really need to pay attention to this, and then potentially going into the Caribbean. Where it goes after that, we still have some questions, but we're seeing consistency in both of our models, and the GFS and the Euro are both picking up some type of spin with this, with a greater likelihood of development the closer it gets into the Caribbean. This time of the year, development in the main development region that we call it, as those waves come off the coast of Africa in the far eastern Atlantic, it's pretty rare. So if this happens, it would be a little bit early and a little bit unusual to see that happen. It's more likely to see development into the Caribbean, into the Gulf of Mexico, or a little bit closer at home, closer to where we'll get these disturbances work their way offshore and kind of stall out our old frontal boundaries. So all these dots showing you where tropical systems typically get started in the month of June, and notice kind of the absence of them over into the farther Atlantic. Now early July, it's a little bit more likely to start further out, but August is really the season when we start watching things get going here into the MDR.
But of course, Dr. Postel, Florida sticks out like a sore thumb here into parts of the tropics, and it begs the question, how active are the tropics as we are starting the beginning of the season?
You could argue even more so than typical for this time of year, Collin. Thank you very much. Let's have a look at the satellite pictures. There are a couple of things to watch on the Atlantic side, right? We have a Gulf of Mexico area to watch with not much of a chance over the next few days. I'll talk about that at 50 past the hour. But we've got this one, Invest 94L in the tropical Atlantic, that bears watching. It needs our attention. It may not look like much right now in the visible satellite pictures, but there is an area of spin aloft, and looking at some of the satellite-derived winds near the surface, not yet. It doesn't appear to have a coherent and well-defined circulation at the surface, but it's trying. And this system right here, seemingly amidst a trio of candidates, maybe, this one appears to have the best chance over the next several days as it roughly moves along a path like that. That is at relatively low latitude. In the next 5 days, this area outlined by the National Hurricane Center for the likelihood that it'll be moving along that way with water temperatures the entire time above 80 degrees, we think, which is certainly sufficient to support tropical development. The wind shear not really going to be much of a factor. The strongest winds aloft during this entire time will be relegated to areas way to the north. So this will be moving through a relatively tranquil environment, and it will have plenty of spin to work with. That suggests that this thing has a chance to strengthen significantly, and the odds, according to the European model, of this thing becoming at least a depression are pretty high, above 70%, thanks to our friends here at Weather Bell. Let's look at the tropics because they've come alive in recent days, and I do believe we're going to see our next named storm, that would be Bonnie, in the tropical Atlantic in the coming days. Now, you look at this overall satellite picture and you might think, where are you talking? I'm initially starting here in our tropical update with what's called Invest 94L for now. That's got a pretty good chance of becoming either a depression or even beyond that, a named storm, which I think it will attain over time as it moves toward the west, roughly in that direction. So if you have interests in the Windward Islands of the Lesser Antilles right here, we might get some stormy weather in about, well, 3 days or so, maybe a little less than that. Midweek, we should see some active weather. And then, of course, we have an area to watch in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll get to that certainly at 50 past the hour. And let's go bit by bit first here with Invest 94L. Much better organized than it was yesterday, although the convection hasn't completely consolidated in a way that would allow this to become stronger more quickly. It's trying, and you can see that it's got a lot more thunderstorms than it did yesterday, and very likely an area of low pressure, certainly a trough of low pressure, and maybe even a complete circulation at low levels, but not quite yet sort of coupled with or associated with what we think is an area of low pressure or a circulation aloft that's much more well defined. So yes, it's got some room to work with, for sure, and it's got some maturing to do before it would become a tropical depression, but I think it will get there. Here's one example of the likelihood of that happening. This is a model forecast from the European ECMWF Forecast Center showing you the odds of a tropical depression, and those odds are very high. They're over the 70 to 80% chance, and that's just the ECMWF model. I can tell you some of the other guidance suggests the odds of that happening are even more than that. But look where it's going. It's very likely going to sort of hug the southern part of the Caribbean Sea and eventually find itself close to Central America later next week or next weekend. But before that, we have to watch out for this thing winding up as it approaches the Windward Islands of the Lesser Antilles by midweek. It could be a rather stormy time of it, Molly, in places like, for example, Barbados. To you.
Multiple areas of interest right now, 2 in the Eastern Pacific, 3 in the Atlantic Basin. It does include 2 systems out here in the Atlantic headed toward the Caribbean, but this area to watch in the Gulf of Mexico is, I think, first and foremost because they may have the most immediate effects on U.S. 20% chance of formation here, so not a high chance, but the models are hinting and have been for days that something could form a little bit farther south and west of the current location here, and over the next 5 days, most likely to affect coastal Texas. There's a look at the European model rainfall forecast. I think that'll be the big thing more than anything else is how much rain does this system produce. Not saying it's going to be an overly big wind producer, but we definitely could get some rain. 5 to 8 inches around Victoria, 3 to 5 headed up towards, say, the I-10 corridor here. We've got similar amounts, but smaller aerial coverage here from the GFS model, but still some areas that are very susceptible to flooding could indeed flood. Then we take a look at the other Invest we have out there in the Atlantic. So this is Invest 94L, 90% chance of becoming our next tropical cyclone. There are the Lesser Antilles right there. Then you see South America, which could also be in play here as it takes a very far southerly track here over the next 5 days. Especially, I think, near the islands, there's a pretty good shot here for some formation. The high pressure to the north is really steering it west the whole time here with no opportunity to pull northbound here. But you look at the spin that's now modeled here, and you can see that we've got a strong steering pattern, spin that's forming, and we think almost a sure bet that this forms into something in the Caribbean here. There's one behind it as well, 20% odds of this forming into a next tropical cyclone, and that also moving in a very similar location to 94L, which is right ahead of it. And once again, the Antilles could be at risk here. Here are the 2 of them rolling westbound in tandem. The first one, again, taking a pretty far south track here and may affect us in places like Nicaragua there in Central America. The one behind it may actually pull a little bit more to the north here as the high pressure weakens and pulls a little bit to the east. So that may allow rotation to be more like this around the high pressure and pull this or slingshot a little bit farther north. That might bring the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, even the Bahamas, and wouldn't roll out maybe some effects on the southeast coastline. All those things to be determined over time. This is a week from now, Alex, so time to keep an eye on this and just watch what happens. Don't tune out because of the 4th of July holiday is coming up, but just keep an eye on it.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, looking at the timestamp on that, Monday, July 4th. So really important if you've got beach plans in those southeast Florida beaches to keep a close attune to what we're doing here on the Weather Channel.
We are watching 3 systems right now, 2 in the Atlantic and 1 in the Caribbean.
And it's going to be a busy summer.
Hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry is here to show us what he's watching. Michael.
At this rate it is, Calvin. Yeah, take a look at new advisory in from the National Hurricane Center for potential tropical cyclone 2. This is that disturbance in the middle of the Atlantic that we've been tracking now for several days. Doesn't quite have enough organization to call it a tropical depression or a tropical storm, but it is close enough to the islands here that the Hurricane Center wants to put out advisories and also put out warnings for the southern windward islands that include Trinidad and Tobago and Grenada as well. You can see the warnings really affecting the southernmost of the windward islands. This one is forecast to become a hurricane in the next few days. If it did so, it would be the first of our hurricanes that we've seen in the Atlantic this year. All right, otherwise in the tropics, we're following 2 other areas that have a low possibility of development. One in the Gulf of Mexico. That is going to be slipping over toward the coast of Texas and Mexico. We're not expecting any development with this one. The disturbance that we're tracking to the east of newly minted potential tropical cyclone 2, this one will be headed off toward the Greater Antilles over the next few days. Could bring some rain showers to Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, but it should stay pretty weak. Not expecting this one really to develop into much over the coming days. So no concerns, thankfully, at least in the immediate term for South Florida.
But first at 11, we are tracking the tropics, and there is a lot of activity in the Atlantic.
Sure is. Let's get to WPTV First Alert meteorologist John Gerard with the areas to watch for. John.
Yeah, the way it's looking right now, Honey and Michael, we're going to be escaping all of this activity, at least in the near term, maybe down the road sometime later next week. A system way out in the Atlantic could become a bit of a threat, but right now, the 3 that we're watching, yes, you heard me correctly, the 3. The first one is a disturbed area of weather over the northwestern Gulf of Mexico. It's going to be drifting away from Florida and dump some very much needed rain on a severe drought area there in Texas. They're welcoming that with open arms later this week. There's also a system way out in the eastern tropical Atlantic, which the computer models say in about 10 days could be out somewhere near the Bahamas. So we'll keep an eye on that. But the main concern is the one in red. That's the one that the National Hurricane Center has identified as a potential tropical cyclone. It means it's got the tropical characteristics, but not quite a close circulation yet. So it's not a truly tropical system yet. But when it does, it'll become Bonnie, second name system of the season. By tomorrow, should be a tropical storm bearing down on Trinidad and Tobago, and then moving off as a tropical storm across the northern coast of Venezuela, really, really far south, and then heading toward Nicaragua, perhaps as a Category 1 hurricane as we head toward the end of the week. As far as the watches and warnings, there is a warning for Trinidad and Tobago, a tropical storm watch for the north coast of Venezuela. Very early very weird for so early in the season. We'll take a look at our weather in just a few minutes.
Let's talk tropics, because as you look at this, you might be like, wow, there's a lot going on here. 5 little circles. Breaking it down quickly, Tropical Depression Celia losing steam, Invest 94E in the East Pac. We've got Invest 95L with a low chance of development there in the Gulf, but regardless, it's going to bring some heavy rain to portions of the Gulf Coast over the next several days. We've also got potential tropical cyclone 2 that's approaching the Windward Islands, and an area to watch just behind that, that's a tropical wave currently with with a low chance of development. It has a better chance of impacting the Leeward Islands over the next several days. So let's focus in on potential tropical cyclone 2. Winds have been found at 40 miles an hour. It's moving pretty quickly west at 23 miles an hour. What does PTC2 even mean? Well, what it means is while it's not reached, we don't have that closed circulation to indicate a tropical depression or a tropical storm, it will bring some tropical storm force winds possibly to Trinidad and Tobago and to Grenada as we head through the next 48 hours. So that is why we have those tropical storm warnings, and that is also why it's been designated PTC2. It's going to be steered by this high pressure in the Atlantic. It's pushing it westward, interacting with the northern coast of South America, the ABC Islands, Venezuela, getting some of this interaction, and how much it interacts with land as it moves westward through the southern Caribbean is really going to determine what emerges and how much development we can get here in the southwest Caribbean this weekend as it heads towards Central America. So regardless of development, especially the mountainous portions of Costa Rica, Nicaragua are going to see a lot of rain, and we know that can lead to some issues regardless of development.
Most of the showers have pushed well inland. It's mostly dry for your lunch hour between Broward, Dade, and the Florida Keys, but here you could tell those showers are moving into southwest Florida. Now in the tropics, we are tracking potential storm number 2. There was a plane investigating this potential storm, and they can't find a well-defined center of circulation. Another plane is en route to gather more information this afternoon, so of course we'll keep you posted with the latest, but they're still thinking it could become a tropical storm as it moves over the Windward Islands. 40-mile-per-hour winds. It is moving quickly toward the west and located a little over 200 miles to the east of Trinidad. And based on the forecast track tonight into tomorrow, crosses the southern Windward Islands, then brushing the northern coast of Venezuela, but by Wednesday night, moving through the ABC Islands. Once it moves into the southwestern Caribbean Sea, environmental conditions are very favorable for it to grow potentially into the season's first hurricane, maybe making landfall across portions of Central America on Saturday with 75-mile-per-hour winds. Now, there are new updates with the watches and warnings. Grenada and its dependencies, Trinidad, Tobago under a tropical storm warning, but now a warning has been issued for the islands off the coast of northern Venezuela and all of the ABC Islands under a tropical storm warning. As far as the rest of the tropics are concerned, there's a tropical wave behind potential storm number 2. Low chance to form in this area highlighted in yellow. A lot of heavy rain, gusty winds possibly reaching the Lesser Antilles Friday. And then there's an area of low pressure that's flared up in the northwestern Gulf of Mexico, showing signs of organization. It has a low chance to form, but regardless of development, heavy rainfall to spread into eastern Texas, 2 to 5 inches of rain possible through the late week.
Yesterday in Austin, certainly seeing that heavy rain, and this could end up being a pretty common sight as this tropical disturbance is expected to bring some rain to parts of Texas. And now we want to bring in hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb for a closer look at all of it. And we start here closer to Texas. Dr. Knabb.
Yeah, and Chris, this is something that's happened many times before, a depression or a storm, a short-lived one forming right on the Texas coast. Now, a lot of folks there might say, bring it on, we need the rain, but we just have to be concerned about a little too much of a good thing, possibly in some spots. There's a 4 out of 10 shot, according to the Hurricane Center, of this becoming a depression or storm in the next couple of days. Beyond that time, it's going to be moving inland and be a rainmaker. So it's got a little bit of time over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. There's the surface low with some thunderstorm activity. Now, a lot of convection over land today. A lot of that has to do with not just the heating of the day, but the instability from the cold air loft with this upper level low, which is producing some wind shear over our Gulf system. So that's good. It's going to lessen the development potential, but not eliminate it. We've got the center of the low getting more and more involved with the convection, but the convection is limited and disorganized, so it's got some developing to do. The rainfall directly associated with it has been mostly offshore today, but tomorrow that will change as it gets closer to the Texas coast. So we could have some locally heavy downpours middle and upper Texas coast tomorrow afternoon and evening, and then maybe some banding setting up on Thursday, and that will bring at least an isolated flood risk to places like Victoria and Houston. That's where the most rainfall is probably going to fall, although some of it could go farther inland as the system moves away from the Gulf of Mexico during the holiday weekend. But we've seen this happen before. It's just that this time around, Chris, it's happening where the Texas region needs the rain. So I'm a little less concerned about a big-time flooding event like we've had in the past with the likes of Tropical Storm Bill in 2015, Imelda 2019. They were short-lived tropical storms that formed on the coast, but then had deadly flooding inland.
Dr. Knapp, now let's talk about potential tropical cyclone 2. Could be our next named storm. What do you think the potential is right now as you see things?
It's still more likely than not that this will become Bonnie, as long as something else doesn't form in the Gulf or somewhere else faster. But this is likely to become a tropical storm over the next few days. 70% chance in the next 2 days, 90% in the next 5. But it's not yet a tropical storm because it doesn't have a closed circulation. It is a very vigorous tropical wave, a trough. The NOAA hurricane hunters did not find a closed circulation at the surface. And that's important to know, not just for whether or not you give it a name or not, but also structurally, is it going to be organized enough to strengthen over the Eastern Caribbean? Is it going to withstand some of the land interaction? Well, whether or not that happens, we've got a fast-moving system producing winds of tropical storm force already. So the reason the advisories are being written is to get these watches and warnings up for the various countries here in the south part of the Caribbean Sea, including the ABC Islands that don't get direct hits from tropical storms very often. They might at least get the conditions tomorrow night into Thursday morning. But then, depending upon how much time it spends over water, how strong could it get in the Southwest Caribbean? Could it flirt with hurricane intensity? Either way, it's getting to Central America as a rainmaker and probably gets into the East Pacific as well. But Chris, there's more where that came from in the Atlantic.
And Dr. Knapp, you just alluded to something that I think it seems like at least every season people wonder about how a storm that's a little farther away or starting to show signs of development actually ends up getting the name ahead of something that we've been watching for a longer period of time. Dr. Knapp, what is the other contender out there right now that could be the next maybe B or C name storm?
Well, if it's not in the Gulf or PTC2, the next candidates for getting tropical storm status eventually would be the tropical waves that are right behind PTC2. There's a whole train of them out there. Here's PTC2, but there are 2 more tropical waves right behind that. And, these come off of Africa every 2, 3, or 4 days. It's just that right now they're a little more convectively active than usual for this time of year. So those next 2 waves have a chance to actually combine forces as the farthest east one catches up to the next one, and we could have development as it approaches and goes through the Windward and Leeward Islands on about Friday. Now watch how this plays out in the models. Colors showing you the low-level spin. Windward and Leeward Islands, PTC2. But the next 2 tropical waves, watch the low-level spin represented by the colors there. Here they are getting closer together as the third one kind of catches up. And then we have one larger one getting to the islands on Friday. Now it's going to encounter some wind shear that would be less conducive for development than what PTC2 is experiencing as it races toward the East Pac by the weekend. But then that next system, after it goes through the islands on Friday, is maybe tangling with Hispaniola, Cuba, maybe the Bahamas by Sunday. So it might try to make a run at Florida into next week. And what's left of it, or it, might get there after the holiday weekend, Chris. So we have a lot of time to watch that one.
Let's talk weather, and we're talking the tropics again tonight. It remains quite active. 3 systems, 1 in the Caribbean, a 2nd in the Atlantic, and a 3rd in the Gulf of Mexico. And let's begin with this system in the Gulf. It continues to spin right here. Not a whole lot of convection, but it has a window, about 36 hours between now and, say, Thursday morning before moving on shore to become a tropical depression. Hurricane hunters are scheduled to go out there tomorrow. In the Caribbean, this is potential tropical cyclone 2. It will likely become tropical storm Bonnie tomorrow. Tonight, winds are still right around 40. It's moving west-northwest at 26. It could become Bonnie, assuming it stays over water, and that's the forecast from the Hurricane Center. As you can see, as we head toward Thursday, maybe a hurricane by Friday before moving into Central America. After that, into the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean, where it could become another tropical system as well. The other system, a little bit farther east in the Atlantic, no worry at the present time.
Highs will only be reaching the upper 80s because of the cloud cover in place and the rain around. There was one shower that rolled through Fort Lauderdale and started to diminish as it headed towards Deerfield Beach. Tropical updates in. Let's take a look at what's going on at 5 a.m. this morning. We are watching these 3 areas in the tropics. Still watching what is potential tropical cyclone 2 as the 5 a.m. advisory winds at 40 miles per hour. It is racing to the west, which is really inhibiting its tropical cyclone development to become a tropical storm because it's running into a lot of shearing at 30 miles per hour. Otherwise, we are still watching 2 other areas, and because we have so much moisture, tropical storm force winds and rain are associated with potential tropical cyclone number 2 in the Windward Islands. So here's this area in the Gulf has a 40% chance of development, and another area behind potential tropical cyclone development 2 has a 30% chance. More on the forecast because that rain's moving in, coming up in just a bit.
In the tropics, speaking of tracking, we are following a couple of areas here. Potential storm number 2 is what is being tracked. That is moving west. Tropical wave here, once it moves into the area highlighted in yellow, we'll get a 30% chance for organization. And then there's this area of low pressure by Texas, 40% chance for growth. Even if it doesn't come together, it's going to dump a lot of rain over Texas. Right now, a lot of rain is coming down from potential storm number 2 across the northern portions here of South America, impacting the ABC Islands. There is now a tropical storm warning for much of northern Colombia. And the area here along the coast for Nicaragua is now under a hurricane watch because this system, they're hoping that it doesn't move in as a Category 1 like they had yesterday. But even so, it's a strong tropical storm, 70-mile-an-hour winds, not much of a difference. They're still looking at some gusty winds and the potential for heavy rain.
But first, this evening, all attention on the tropics. The National Hurricane Center is watching 3 separate systems.
And that means so is our WPTV First Alert meteorologist, Kate Winsel, tracking a very active end to June. Kate?
Yeah, Michael and Hani, that's often the way it happens in the tropics. We stay quiet, and then all of a sudden, now we're tracking 3 systems. Only one has the potential to bring us some rain, but not for a whole nother week, so we have time to watch and nothing to worry about. It's this system right here that likely will form into a tropical storm and perhaps a hurricane. This is potential tropical cyclone 2. It's moving to the west at 21 miles per hour with max sustained winds of 40. So you can see all the spaghetti models closely clustered, and that means it is going to be moving westward. We'll be bringing some heavy rains to the folks in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and then it is expected to merge back out into the Pacific Ocean. And as it does so, the official track calls for strengthening to a Cat 1 hurricane. Of course, once it's in the Pacific Basin, it's really none of our concern, but just interesting to know where it's going, and it's going away from us. This disturbance has a 40% chance of development. It's moving west, so it's going to bring a heavy rains to portions of the Texas coastline. And then this disturbance, here's where it's located, but it could develop as it gets into this region. Right now, only a 20% chance of developing, but this is the one that could bring us some rain if it lifts northward. We'll have more in the tropics, and of course, your 4th of July holiday forecast coming up.
We've got a couple different things that we're watching right now. We've got Invest 95L in the Gulf. We've got PTC 2 and an area to watch. The area to watch only has about a 10% chance of development as it continues to move westward toward the Lesser Antilles. That's something we'll continue watching for you, but we do have PTC 2 that could be our next named storm by later today. And then the disturbance in the Gulf that, regardless of development, is going to bring a ton of tropical moisture to the Gulf Coast plain of Texas and then up into the lower Mississippi River Valley. So here's PTC 2. Now, the National Hurricane Center is saying that this could be our next named storm. The forecast is for this to reach tropical storm limits as it moves westward, emerges over the southwestern portions of the Caribbean. It has less inhibition from land, and so it will be able to strengthen a little bit. So we do have those tropical storm warnings, hurricane watches, and tropical storm watches up for portions of Central America. Now, you'll see the current forecast. It does have it making it to 45-mile-per-hour winds by Friday. You'll remember that initial forecast earlier on had it possibly reaching hurricane strength here in the southwestern Caribbean, so we can be thankful for that. You'll notice it'll move across land, and if it holds it together and stays recognizable, it would keep that name Bonnie if it does get the name there as it moves toward Central America. So here are some of the factors that are helping to steer this. Our high pressure steering PTC2. It's also steering our system that we have in the Gulf. But what is also supporting this once it gets out over open water is that the water is very, very warm. It will have a chance to stop interacting with land, which, as we know, tears those tropical systems apart. But the unfavorable wind shear, it stays north of the storm track, could have a little bit of interaction with it, but in general, it doesn't have a ton of inhibiting factors, with the exception of the fact that it has a small window before it interacts with the mountainous terrain of Central America. So Costa Rica, Nicaragua, we could see several inches of rain coming down on that mountainous terrain, and we know that that can lead to issues, mudslides, landslides. Taking a look at that other area to watch, as I mentioned, about a 10% chance of development, not looking impressive at all right now, but still could bring some squally weather to places like Barbados as we head through the weekend.
All right, want to get a look at the tropics. We've got Dr. Nab, our hurricane expert, standing by. Big holiday weekend, a lot of people heading to the coast. Texas coast, not ideal here as we look at our Invest, still hanging around, bringing quite a bit of rain.
Yeah, it'll get better along the coast as the holiday weekend goes on, but between now and Saturday, there could be a good bit of rain in southeast Texas, southwest Louisiana, especially near the coast. And we still could get a short-lived tropical depression today, but a less than 50-50 shot of that occurring as the system moves northward. Either way, the impacts are going to be the same and mostly confined to heavy rainfall that could produce some localized flooding, especially in urban areas and anywhere that's prone to having drainage problems, especially middle and upper Texas coast. But because of our washed out front and the soupy atmosphere coming in east of our tropical system, we got a localized flash flood risk that goes all the way over to the Georgia coastline. But southeast Texas, southwest Louisiana, the problem continues into tomorrow, even into tomorrow night and Saturday morning. Here is our surface low centered off of Corpus Christi, but because of wind shear, it is very lopsided, and you've got a pretty dense area of convection just off the southeast coast. And then there's a surface trough connected to all this with our washed out front, so we've got a batch of rain going into the Florida Panhandle. New Orleans even has a flash flood warning. Now, you see the surface observations are not going to reveal a whole lot of strong wind here. It's a broad area of low pressure, onshore flow into southeast Texas, producing a rip current risk, and that the spin you see kind of here is a mid-level area of low pressure, but we do have some pretty heavy rain that's mainly just offshore but going right into Galveston Bay. Just offshore in the last 3 hours we've had more than 3 inches of rain just off the Galveston coastline, and in the last 12 hours we've had a spot offshore, radar estimated more than ½ a foot. So the more that this gets onshore, the more we could have a flash flood risk in an urban area like Galveston. We also have the onshore flow into our surface trough, producing the flash flood warning there in New Orleans. Now look at the future radar. Now the model might not have the greatest handle on all of this in terms of the details, but it does show more rain coming into southeast Texas tonight and tomorrow morning, then going a fair distance inland. So we could get locally several inches to ½ a foot or more of rain as that goes northward, especially in southeast Texas. Even the Euro's kicking out a 5 to 8 inch area there near Galveston Bay, Alex. So concerned mainly about rainfall. Even though we've been in a drought, don't totally discount the flash flood risk in an urban area.
Oh, yeah, too much of a good thing, certainly a thing. PTC2 likely to become Bonnie, and this could do something that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, we are getting the forecast that this will become a tropical storm in the southwest Caribbean and then last as at least a tropical depression all the way across Central America. So it's not a tropical storm yet, but it's forecast to become one, still suffering from some dry air off the continent of South America there. And it could even flirt with hurricane intensity, but more likely it's a tropical storm, and it could produce tropical storm conditions on the other side of Central America. And the forecast shows you getting, strong tropical storm here, but lasting as a tropical cyclone all the way across Central America. If that happens, if it gets the name Bonnie here and it lasts all the way across, then it keeps that name Bonnie on the East Pacific side. Caesar in 1996 became Douglas, but in the year 2000, they changed the procedure, Alex. So in 2016, when Otto formed on the East Caribbean side, it kept that name in the East Pac. So it could happen again this time.
All right, tracking the tropics out there, we still have 3 systems that we're watching very carefully out there. This tropical wave out east of the islands now down to a 10% development chance. Models just don't development. It's a disorganized area of showers and storms. Here's potential tropical cyclone number 2, 90% development chance on that, and we've got that low pressure area off the Texas coast. So we begin with PTC number 2 here, looking stretched out and ragged, just cannot seem to get its act together. For 3 days now, Hurricane Center has been thinking it's going to develop, but it hasn't yet. Still, though, has tropical storm force winds of 40, but no closed circulation. You can see that stretched out band of showers and rain. Moving west to 20, it's still expected, though, to become a tropical storm Bonnie at any time, and then make landfall here at the coast of Nicaragua later tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow night. Thereafter, moving out into the Pacific and perhaps become a hurricane then. Interesting to note, it would still retain that name Bonnie as long as it gets named before it moves into Central America. Computer models still tightly clustered, keeping it far south of West Palm. No influences at all here from that system, not even close. Tropical storm warnings in effect for parts of the Costa Rica and Nicaraguan coast today. Tropical storm watch in effect for the Pacific side of both countries. So here is actually the Invest 95L. The low pressures here. All of the rain is disjointed, located well to the northeast of it. A lot of rain in the Houston area. Could be some flooding stretching into sections of Louisiana. Invest 95L has top winds of 35. Moving north at 6 miles an hour. Computer models bring it into Texas, but because it's so lopsided, most of the heavy rain will be staying off to the east. From Houston north and east towards the New Orleans area and Lake Charles, notice in the purple and pink will be getting excess of 9 to 15 inches of rain between now and later on Sunday afternoon. Next name on the list is Bonnie, so we'll see which system gets named. Could be interesting.
We turn now to our daily check on the tropics and the latest on the disturbance poised to become the next named tropical storm.
Our chief certified meteorologist, Betty Davis, tracking it all for us tonight. Hey, Betty.
Hey, guys. Still not a tropical storm yet. Just got the new advisory in. The National Hurricane Center saying that low-level circulation center just not defined enough, even though the system appears to be becoming better organized. Winds of 40 miles per hour, and it's still forecast to become a tropical storm before it reaches, say, southern Nicaragua or right around northern Costa Rica later in the day on Friday. It moves across that area, heads over to the eastern Pacific, where the forecast shows it eventually becoming a hurricane. Still on a path that keeps it so far away from the U.S., so we don't want to worry about that. In fact, we don't even want to worry about the other 2 disturbances out there, the one moving ashore along the Texas coast tonight, and then this tropical wave, which is going to cross the Windward Islands, it looks like tomorrow. We'll keep eyes on that one as it moves into the eastern Caribbean Sea, but conditions so hostile, we don't expect it to develop. Maybe it brings us some rainfall by the middle part of next week, but not really a system we're all that concerned about.
Holiday weekend carbon copy forecast of today going into tomorrow, Sunday and Monday. Now, the rest of the nation also dealing with the heat. They're feeling like summer and very hot, dry conditions, providing for red flag warnings out west. And as we go to the east, their temperatures climbing to the 90s, even Washington, D.C. at 90 degrees come 4th of July. All right, it finally happened. Air Reserve hurricane hunters actually went out there moments ago and finally found the center of circulation for this to become Tropical Storm Bonnie, the second named storm of the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. This just came off the notifications from the National Hurricane Center. Winds are at 40 miles per hour, but again, aircraft Reserve was out there and found that center. We talked about, I've been telling you, we've been seeing a cluster of storms inundating Costa Rica all morning long. But again, they found that closed center. So because of that, we now have Tropical Storm Bonnie. Again, not a threat for us here in South Florida, but it is going to bring some major issues for flooding concerns for parts of Costa Rica as we go into the weekend. So stay here in South Florida. This is the best place to be all weekend long.
Heavy rain over Atlanta this morning, and this is what we saw a lot of in other cities as well across the South. If you look at the radar now, it's raining really hard in Texas. It's raining really hard across parts of the Florida Panhandle, and it's also raining very hard, look at this, just off the coast of Georgia. And I was just told that the National Hurricane Center has now circled this area with a 10% chance of developing, rightly so. As we mentioned, there is an area of low pressure, a well-defined one. The wind is going all the way around in a circle. There's an upper level circulation as well, and some thunderstorms scattered around. So it's not really that well developed, but it certainly caught a lot of our attention here as you saw this very clearly on the visible satellite shots in recent hours. A little area of low pressure there getting tucked underneath some thunderstorms, at least in the last few frames. Now, the duration, the amount of time that this would need to have in order to become a bona fide tropical cyclone, it would take a while, and I'm not sure it's got that much time. But we'll watch it just in case, because it is over very warm water, and yes, there is a bit of westerly shear over it, but still, there's a shot at that thing turning in to maybe a depression in the next couple of days. The other area we're watching was another tropical entity. If you remember, this was Invest 95L. It is now inland over Texas and is bringing extremely heavy rain to Louisiana, and this heavy rain is going to lead the potential for flooding because the atmosphere is not just moist, Alex, near the surface. There's throughout a very deep layer of the atmosphere, high water content. Rainmakers are very efficient in this part of the country.
At the time, the radar was estimating about 10 inches of rain during a 24-hour period. Hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb is here. That's a lot of rain, Dr. Knabb. What else do you watch in terms of the flood threat here?
Well, unfortunately, the rain is not completely over in the Port Arthur, Texas area. A little bit more going on right now, a little bit more tomorrow morning. And so you got to really adhere to that saying. Turn around, don't drown. Don't drive your car onto any water-covered roadway. That's the main way you get into trouble, and a lot of folks have gotten into that trouble in Port Arthur today. And we've got actually 2 low-pressure systems that have a tropical character to them. There's our low that was Invest 95L that has moved inland and produced the flooding in southeast Texas, southwest Louisiana. And then we've got our new Invest 96 here on the southeastern U.S. coast, and the flow around that, bringing the bad weather that is hindering the cleanup of that accident on I-95. So let's zoom in on our Texas and mainly Louisiana rainfall right now. The low pressure system is not really strong, but you can see the low level clouds swirling around counterclockwise, and the heavy rain has lessened quite a bit, but unfortunately there's still little downpours right in the area where we don't need any more rain at all, because we've had over 6 inches in many spots, up to a foot locally right near that Texas-Louisiana border. Heaviest rains now getting into Morgan City, but we still got a few pop-up showers coming through Port Arthur. We don't need another drop because we're still trying to get all that water to drain. But look at the future radar as that low slowly moves northward inland. By tomorrow morning, another batch of rain going right through the same area. So more flooding is possible by the time you wake up tomorrow morning, and it might take into the afternoon for that to end. So careful on the roads when you get up tomorrow morning in that zone. Now, not only do we have the risk of flash flooding through tomorrow morning in southeast Texas, southwest Louisiana, but also in South Carolina, Charleston, down to Savannah, and even into southeastern Georgia, because we've got that Invest 96L that is causing the trouble there. So this has a small chance of becoming a depression or storm, but as it moves northeastward, it's going to be a rain producer, and it is contributing to those problems that we're seeing on I-95. Again, not necessarily the cause of the accident, but certainly hindering the cleanup and producing some dangerous conditions on the road, some lightning as well. So the surface low is right there going up the coast between Hilton Head and Charleston. But the broader low is producing a flow from west to east along I-95 near the Georgia-Florida line. So that's why the storms are coming in from west to east. And if you zoom in, you can see the surface low moving right up into there. It's kind of going right into Edisto Beach right now, and a big blow up of storms right there as we go to the sunset. Look at that. And Charleston is about to get rocked with some heavy rainfall. They've got a flash flood watch in effect. So Chris Burin, this is why I'm concerned about Charleston overnight, and this is why the weather is not so good along the Florida-Georgia line and I-95. Now, at least we're not dealing with a significant tropical storm landfall in the U.S. That's what our friends down in Nicaragua and Costa Rica are dealing with in the next few hours. So around our Bermuda High, we've got our 2 low pressure systems that are producing the rainfall. But on the southern side of that, our fast moving tropical wave that was potential tropical cyclone 2 this morning became Tropical Storm Bonnie. And now it's only 3-4 hours away from making landfall near the Costa Rica-Nicaragua border. 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm moving still pretty quickly west, although slower than it was at 17 miles an hour. So it's going to be making landfall here in the next few hours. Tropical storm warnings up on both sides of Central America because this will be a quick mover. It might go down to depression, but it'll probably stay at least a depression all the way across and produce tropical storm conditions on the Pacific coast. And as long as it stays at least a depression all the way across, it will keep the name Bonnie as it goes into the eastern Pacific. Along the way, heavy rainfall. It could be up to a foot locally in some spots. Life-threatening flash floods and mudslides, a big concern in those mountainous countries down there. And you can see on the satellite, last few visible images of the day, how well defined this is. Looks a lot different than it did last night as we watched it on Storm Center, starting to really become a tropical storm, but it did that overnight. Now, it's hard to be sure exactly how strong it is based on the satellite, so come to the rescue our hurricane hunters from the Air Force that forward deployed to St. Croix and then have been flying across the Caribbean to make a flight here in the last few hours before landfall so that the folks down there know exactly how strong it is. And we have a good start to the forecast for as it goes into the eastern Pacific, which where will be over those warm waters by tomorrow afternoon, and then it's likely to strengthen into a hurricane. And again, as long as it stays a tropical depression, at least that all the way across Central America, then it will keep that name Bonnie. So this will only be the second time ever, if that's the case, that an Atlantic name has been used in the eastern Pacific. The last time that happened was 2016 when Hurricane Otto lasted across and was still Otto in the East Pacific. So, Chris, this will be a pretty rare occurrence.
We say this is the second time?
Yep, second time the name has ever been used. They changed the procedure in the year 2000 to not force a name change.
So it wasn't possible before the year 2000.
That's right.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Tropical Storm Bonnie, 11 p.m. advisory just came in, and the National Hurricane Center says that it made landfall right across the Costa Rica-Nicaragua border. A little stronger, 50-mile-per-hour winds now moving to the west at 16. By the way, earlier today, it impacted this little island out here called San Andres, and we do have some video as the system was making its way across the area. Now, this was upgraded from potential storm number 2 at 9:15 this morning. Even though the island sits close to Nicaragua, it is actually a Colombian territory. The system provided plenty of heavy rain along with gusty winds. All right, so where is the system headed? Well, we have the system right now in between San Jose and Bluefields. It will continue to track towards the west, and it could become a Category 1 system just to the south of Acapulco sometime next week. We'll be tracking it very carefully. So there is the forecast cone. We are also eyeing 2 other areas. There's a wave here by the Lesser Antilles, 10% chance for organization. Remember yesterday we were also looking at a disturbance by Texas. The National Hurricane Center says nothing tropical there. It will continue to provide for some rain. And then we have an area of low pressure by Georgia and the Carolinas, 20% chance for some growth.
Good morning, everyone. Tracking the tropics. Time is 6:08. We have Tropical Storm Collin that formed earlier this morning. All the convection on the east side of the center, as you can see, it will be impacting the Carolinas throughout the next couple of days near the coastal area. So the latest forecast track takes it towards the north and northeast near the coastal areas of South and North Carolina by Sunday into Monday as a very weak tropical system. Meanwhile, we have this tropical wave. We don't have to worry about it because it has a very low chance for tropical development, and no significant development is expected because of high wind shear.
And welcome back to CBS 12 News this morning. The time is 6:48 a.m. I'm meteorologist Zach Covey. Good morning to you on this holiday weekend, and it is time to talk tropics. If you went to bed last night, maybe saw Michael Ehrenberg at 11 talk about Tropical Storm Bonnie and an area to watch, but what about that? Tropical Storm Collin, yeah, that was not there last night. In fact, it was only a 10% shot of development. Well, you put an area of low pressure over the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, anything can happen. Sure enough, we do have a new tropical storm. We'll get to Collin in just a second. First, we start off with Tropical Storm Bonnie. Area of low pressure, the center of circulation moving over Lake Nicaragua right now, working its way into the eastern Pacific Basin. Believe it or not, the center looking good. Very, very good. While the winds have weakened, makes sense, it's over land, the center is holding together. And by all accounts, the National Hurricane Center, even myself, kind of agree that this is likely to be the second storm in history to actually hold its center across the Central American continent into the eastern Pacific Basin. The only other storm to ever do that was Hurricane Otto back in 2016. That basically means that if it does emerge into the Pacific Basin with its center intact, Bonnie, which is an Atlantic name, will stay Bonnie in the Pacific Basin. The only reason that this would get a new name in the Pacific Basin is if it were to leave its low-level center behind and have to create a new one, but that does not look like it's going to happen. It does look like this rare system, an Atlantic system crossing over into the Pacific, will happen. This will eventually become a hurricane as it races out into the open waters of the Pacific. No threat to land after it moves off of Central America. This is newly formed Tropical Storm Collin, a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm off the Carolina coastline. It hit the Gulf Stream. It rapidly intensified. We do have 40-mile-per-hour winds observed. We know that for a fact. The storm will ride the Carolina coastline through the weekend, unfortunately creating just a rough holiday weekend of weather from Myrtle Beach north through Nags Head. But this will eventually dissipate due to very strong shear by Monday morning. No threat to Florida. We do also have a wave south of Puerto Rico. 10% chance of development, a lot of thunderstorms, but it is battling about 40 to 50 mile per hour wind shear, so you just can't form a system in that. And that's going to keep this system from developing into anything tropical. But by Monday, all of that moisture, all of that thunderstorm activity will begin to move into the Bahamas, and by the middle of next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, look at all that moisture moving into South Florida. That will once again increase our rain chances.
Then have Tropical Storm Collin, and you're going, what? Tropical Storm Collin, when did that happen? Well, to tell you, we've got our expert, Dr. Greg Postel.
I'll do my best to clarify all this, but you know what? The low-pressure system that became Tropical Storm Collin earlier this morning had already made its presence felt along South Carolina coasts yesterday. Seen this video, stormy skies and waterspouts off of Myrtle Beach. And Myrtle Beach today will see better weather, than we saw yesterday, even though the center of Collin is actually closer to Myrtle Beach. That shows you that the worst weather with this system is actually offshore, not where the center necessarily of lowest pressure or circulation is. And that would be here. That's where sort of the center of Collin is, if you want to call it that. It is 5 miles west inland of Myrtle Beach. And it's been that way all morning long, and for the most part last night. It was actually designated a tropical storm when the circulation center was inland. We had strong winds, no doubt, come on board from the Atlantic with some bad weather lurking offshore. But look where its path was. It originally came from Georgia as a non-tropical system. Looked rather curious yesterday afternoon. Maybe I thought, geez, we could be dealing with something very close to the coast. We were watching it carefully, and then it moved inland, and only after it moved inland was it called a tropical storm with very heavy rain, certainly very impactful weather across much of the coast of South Carolina yesterday and last night. There's where the center of circulation is right now. The winds inland are not going to be a factor, really, not above the mean, the average, what you would see this time of year in the absence of such a system. But we are seeing a lot of rain out here offshore and now beginning to move onshore into coastal North Carolina. Wilmington, perhaps Wrightsville Beach, heads up, some showers on the way. Same thing for Morehead City and also areas up near Cape Hatteras. We do think the showers and storms that will roll on inbound from the Atlantic could contain some pretty gusty winds, maybe over 40 miles per hour. Why do we say that? Well, look at what happened with some of those gusty showers that moved inland last night over South Carolina. Near Charleston, wind gusts over 50 in some spots with very heavy rain as well. This is a radar estimate of the last 24 hours of how much rain fell in and around the Charleston area, largely to the south of it. But look, this was also supported by some observations where we saw 6 to 8 inches of rain in as little as 12 hours. So it was very rainy, extremely heavy rain, flooding, and also some gusty winds, the kind of wind that could do damage, bring down some trees, even some power lines as well. That sort of whole system, the worst of the weather has moved offshore, as I mentioned. There's where the center of circulation is, right about there, and the nasty thunderstorms are here and kind of getting pushed in that way. You can almost kind of see that right in front of your eyes. Why would that be the case? Well, there are some strong winds aloft-ish that are trying to accomplish that, right? There's a bit of a northwest wind aloft that is allowing that asymmetry. So while the low-level center may be here, the effects of the strong winds aloft are allowing the thunderstorms to flourish here. While we have that sort of separation between the low-level center and the thunderstorms, certainly this is in no hurry to strengthen and will not likely do so today or tonight, and maybe not even ever. This is the official forecast from the Hurricane Center. This system moves along the center of it like that, but again, all the while, probably the worst of the weather remaining offshore, much like this model, this high-resolution forecast suggests. And you can see that going forward in time. There is the bad weather kind of skirting the coast of North Carolina from Wilmington up through maybe Hatteras and areas nearby, everywhere in between. Heads up. And the good news is here by later on tomorrow evening, Molly, the system entirely moves offshore. Well, then we get a cold front coming in with some thunderstorms. So, so we're not through with the stormy weather this weekend. Paul, thank you very much. Plenty of activity in the tropics we've seen in the last week or so. There's a whole lot of activity from Central America with Bonnie as it raced across the Caribbean Sea, intensified into a tropical storm yesterday and moved across Central America, now about ready to reemerge over the Pacific Ocean. And we had a system on the top right of the screen. There's Galveston, Texas, a tropical system that was an invest that brought heavy rain into Texas and Louisiana over the last few days. And of course, we have now Tropical Storm Collin over South Carolina inland. Yeah, so there's a whole lot going on there. Let's have a look bit by bit here. Let's start with Bonnie. This was the one we were watching over the last few days race across the southern Caribbean Sea, very close to South America. It is now about ready, if it hasn't yet, moved over water once again and likely to strengthen as it continues to move toward the west pretty quickly still at 15 miles per hour. So making landfall as a tropical storm in Nicaragua, now continuing on its westward way and likely to become a hurricane as it moves over the distant Pacific Ocean, likely to limit the weather impacts for many of us in Mexico with interest there and or Central America. So that's good news. Of course, still heavy rain occurring from time to time in spots, but overall, the weather conditions will improve everywhere. Now, how about with this area to watch? What is this? Well, we are watching a tropical wave move through the Caribbean. These are systems that routinely cross the Atlantic, especially later on in August and into September. We'll see a lot more of these things. And sometimes they can become candidates or are candidates of tropical development. This one, probably not. I don't think the atmosphere around it is suited for just that, but still, it's got some bad weather with it. And here's what it looks like in the data. We call it a tropical wave because the wind patterns move around in a wave-like fashion, just like that. So imagine the wind at about 5,000 or 10,000 feet up, looking like that. There's the crest of the wave. And as the air approaches this system, this is where the ascent takes place. So the rising air is all out over here. That's why we have the showers and thunderstorms on the east side of the crest of the wave or the trough axis, where the air is on this side of it is sinking, it's descending, so the clouds are suppressed, and that's why we see that kind of asymmetry in the cloud patterns with these tropical waves. Either way, this thing is going to continue to move on roughly toward the west, we think, and still carry with it the showers and thunderstorms. And let's see if this thing has a shot, even though small, according to NHC, as it moves this way, will it perhaps acquire some tropical characteristics? Well, here's some of the modeling suggesting that Probably not. The atmosphere is not really going to allow it to happen. It will probably bring some bad weather once again to Central America by early next week. But there's good news behind it. There's not much out there. The atmosphere will likely try to suppress activity in this region for lots of reasons. And I think as we head toward mid-month overall, the tropical atmosphere in the main parts of the Atlantic will quiet down temporarily. But with that happening in the future, right now, we've got a tropical storm over South Carolina. And we'll be talking about that at the top of the hour.
Temperatures right around 90 degrees as we hit the later afternoon hours, 91 for the high. So it's going to be very hot with the feels like temperature in the triple digits. So as you take a trip up the Carolina coast, we did have a tropical storm. I said did as in past tense because it is gone. It is a depression. It has weakened. It's basically rain with a name now. And as it's going to continue to move offshore, the impacts for the Carolina coast will begin to diminish. Now, this was Tropical Storm Collin earlier this morning. Since it was over land for quite some time, it has weakened. So now it's Tropical Depression Collin, third named storm of the season so far. And then we have Bonnie, a tropical storm that's expected to become a hurricane just to the south of Central America over the next couple days. No threat to the United States after that, or even for Central America either. It's going to stay offshore. Now, we do have another area that we're watching in the tropics. Very low chance of developing as it is in the Caribbean Sea. And there's a lot of wind shear here. So whenever we have wind shear, upper level winds that are stronger than the actual system trying to develop, it really does stunt the development. So that one's really not going to come into play too much, but it's just maybe a little rainmaker as it gets closer to Cuba if it does hold together, if any. But right now, not looking to be a threat.
Reynolds, thank you very much. Yeah, back in the day, I could do it, but yeah, rip currents are very dangerous. You don't even want to attempt to get in the water when they are a real threat. Reynolds, thank you very much for that reporting. And let's have a look at the weather now associated with the remnants of Collin. Remember, this is no longer a tropical storm or a tropical cyclone. It's sort of a blob of rain and clouds off the North Carolina coast. The weather all along the Outer Banks, southwestward through Wilmington and all the way to Charleston, South Carolina. The weather today is actually looking pretty good. And you can see the waves and the winds not really going to be much of a factor, but the rip currents that Reynolds was mentioning, that can still be a factor. Even if the waves aren't very big, you don't really need big waves to have that rip current threat. 1 or 2 foot waves in the right way can pose a lot of problems. So be mindful of that if you're going to the beaches today, because you might be tempted because the weather is actually looking pretty good. The winds are essentially a non-factor, no different than they would be on any July day. The waves on the beaches themselves, the breaking ones that are, not any different, as I mentioned, a couple feet, but offshore is where some of the bigger waves are. You can see as much as 7 feet on estimation from some of the data that's coming in. So this is what the remnants of Collin look like right now on those satellite pictures, and it doesn't really look like much. It's associated with the frontal zone, and there's really no evidence of any circulation anymore. There's a broad southwesterly wind across the region. But let me take you back to Friday morning. This is kind of what Reynolds was getting at. We were all kind of watching the area of low pressure and the rain off the Georgia and South Carolina coast a couple of days ago. Right in about there. Just watch this. This is what sort of raised everyone's antennae about the possibility of tropical development. Can you see that little bit of circulation there? There was an area of low pressure. There were some thunderstorms. Offshore, there were some gusty winds. And that kind of raised, I think, many people's attention to the fact that we could be seeing something trying to develop. But by yesterday morning, most of the circulation was inland, and it didn't look really anything like a tropical system. So, it had its moments, but thankfully never really became of much. However, it was still very impactful with a lot of heavy rain in South Carolina, more than 8 inches in the areas near Charleston. My last graphic shows you. It also brought some gusty winds, too, in places nearby Charleston, Mount Pleasant. Peak gusts there, 54 miles per hour. So, Paul, it brought the weather, but the question is, was it really a tropical cyclone? I guess that's up for debate. Back to you.
But also, July is our second month of hurricane season in the tropics. We've already had a very active start the last couple of weeks. And it's all about what's in the pipeline. What could impact a lot of the vacationers trying to get back out there on the road? Dr. Postel is keeping an eye on the tropics.
Paul, thank you very much. Yeah, we're watching the tropics overall. This time of year, we can get development pretty much anywhere from the Gulf of Mexico through the Caribbean and the Atlantic, so it bears watching. They're the remnants of what was once Tropical Storm Collin. We'll talk more about that at the top of the hour, but we have a tropical storm, a strengthening one, likely to become a hurricane in the Pacific. This is now a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm moving away from land, so that's good news. The weather impacts should be relatively minimal. Although Bonnie formed in the Caribbean, it remained intact as it crossed Central America and now finds itself over the Pacific, preserves the name Bonnie because it didn't disintegrate. So we are going to be watching this system along a path like that, probably becoming, well, we think maybe a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane out in the Pacific, certainly generating some big waves along parts of the Mexican and Central American coast. Let's go back to the Atlantic now, though. We are watching an area of unsettled weather here, moving through parts of the Caribbean and even the Eastern Turks and Caicos. And the question is, do we have to worry about this particular system? And the answer is not really. It will bring some unsettled weather, but it's a tropical wave, a very common feature of the tropical atmosphere, especially this time of year. And when we talk about tropical waves, what we really mean is a wave-like pattern in the winds aloft, like that, right? You can see sort of the crest of the wave right here with a lot of the scattered thunderstorm activity right there on the east side of it. This system, we'll see a lot of these going forward over the next several months. Some of them become candidates, some don't, of tropical development. That one will not likely become one. But look at these water temperatures. Not for now, but for later. In the coming weeks and months, we're going to be dealing with a very warm Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, ripe for tropical development.
Now let's talk about the tropics, because a few days ago they were humming. But today, there's not a lot going on, all right? So here's Tropical Storm Bonnie, but it's in the Pacific. It's forecast to become a hurricane, but moving out to sea. Collin, tropical storm, has unraveled near the coast of the Carolinas, so we're not tracking that one anymore. And then this zone that's in the Central Caribbean going over Hispaniola, it was being spotlighted by the Hurricane Center. Now that's even off the table, not expected to develop, as we have dusty, dry air that's just taken over the tropics. So the bottom line is there's nothing out there that's concerning and nothing expected to form through the middle part of the week at least. Tropics really settling down, so that's some good news. Laren?
Tropical Storm Collin came and went this weekend. If you blinked, you might have missed it. But it also leaves behind some hazardous weather conditions. If you get caught in a rip current, don't panic, don't fight it. Swim parallel to the shore to break the grip of the rip. Watching the tropics, you know, it's been interesting so far this season, where we've had a couple of named storms in the Atlantic. Now we have had Alex and Bonnie, and of course Bonnie made that kind of unusual crossover Central America. It survived the crossover, it kept its tropical characteristics, and so it kept the name Bonnie in the Pacific. And now it's Hurricane Bonnie, actually. So we're not anticipating any tropical activity in the next couple of days in the Atlantic, but we're still watching Hurricane Bonnie. This was Tropical Storm Collin over the weekend. The center of circulation actually formed, and it was named over land. Most of the bad weather stayed just offshore, but it still churned up a lot of rough surf, rip currents, really being the biggest threat with what was once Tropical Storm Collin. Initially, as we started to see this become a named storm, it did produce some stronger winds, mainly in South Carolina, Mount Pleasant being the strongest wind with a wind gust of 54 miles per hour. This is what we like to see right here, especially as we're in the holiday. No new tropical activity expected in the coming days, but here we have Hurricane Bonnie. Really started to take shape after entering the Pacific and really spun up quickly. A lot of convection happened, and it really started to take shape. And now this is moving to the west, and that means it's moving away from land. That is good news. And eventually it will start to weaken over time. Then we look towards the Atlantic just in the coming days to get, you know, is there anything coming down the main development region? And we see, you know, a couple waves try to move off the coast of Africa, but nothing quite develops that spin that you would need to see a tropical system. But this time of year, you can never turn your back on, one, the Gulf of Mexico, but also the main development region, because we can see things spin up very quickly, just as we did with Collin. We still have 96% of activity remaining left to go.
Don't.
Jordan doesn't want to hear
I
it.
hate that graphic. It just lets us know what's on the horizon.
A lot left. Hurricane Bonnie now in the eastern Pacific, but over the weekend, the storm trekked there from the Caribbean via South America. It was a tropical storm as it passed over El Salvador and Nicaragua, bringing heavy rain and winds and pushing some rivers over their banks. The west coast of Mexico feeling winds associated with Bonnie, a little breezy certainly, slightly rougher seas as you get out there into the Pacific Ocean. So let's talk about what is happening with Bonnie currently. Winds now at 90 miles per hour, so it has strengthened since that last update. This is the 10 a.m. update, and you can see moving west-northwest at 18 miles an hour. So now it's about 230 miles south-southeast of Acapulco. It's just going to continue moving out into the eastern Pacific, moving away. It's got the possibility to continue strengthening. You can see the forecast here is certainly for that to happen as we move through the week. Winds getting up to that 105 mile per hour mark. It's got plenty of warm water to work with. You can see all the reds as you're getting into the reds and the dark reds. You're talking about 85, 90 degree water, and that is just what these tropical systems love. They use that warm tropical water as fuel to keep them going. Rain is really not going to be the big story for southern Mexico out of this. It's moving away. That is a really good news for places like Acapulco, Puerto Escondido. This is just going to continue pushing farther away, and you're not going to feel those same rainfall effects that portions of Central America did as it was making landfall. So there's Bonnie. No new tropical activity expected in the Atlantic basin for the coming days. So crazy, right? This tropical season feels like it's been like underperforming, but it's not at all. The past few seasons have just been so overperforming.
Rain from Bonnie caused major flooding across El Salvador. At least one person died. Several homes were damaged. Bonnie has now moved into the eastern Pacific, just off the coast of southern Mexico. We also had Collin over the weekend. Dr. Nab, a lot of people woke up very early Saturday to a tropical storm, although we were still dealing with the weather from it on Friday. We watch close to home this time of year. You know, this week, no exception, although things do look quieter.
Yes, it looks that way, but, you know, we could have another front come by late in the week into next weekend, and, you know, we may deal with the same kind of setup. So you can't turn your back on the tropics anytime. Now, let's take a look at what's going on overall. Atlantic does look quiet this week. But we do have Hurricane Bonnie that was named on the Atlantic side and crossed Central America on Friday night. And it is certainly looking healthy right now, as it is fortunately staying south of Mexico enough they're not under any tropical storm warnings. And here's the frontal boundary that came through the northeast, and we always got to watch those for tropical development. I'll talk about what Collin did over the weekend. So here is Bonnie, again, became a tropical storm here in the southwest Caribbean, crossed Central America Friday night, and has really ramped up. And because it stayed a depression all the way across Central America, it kept that name Bonnie, and now it is in an area where the vertical wind shear is very, very weak, and this is looking really healthy. It is probably already a Category 2 hurricane, even though we don't have an advisory yet showing that. Don't have hurricane hunters out there because it's not a direct land threat. You can see up here the coast of Mexico could get some rip currents and high surf, but not much in the way of wind and not too much rain either, thank goodness. So this was the 11 a.m. advisory intensity. It has been on an upward trend all morning, so it's probably stronger than this, and gets to 100. It would be a Category 2. And I would not rule out this becoming a Category 3 hurricane because it has some time over warm waters for the next few days before it hits the much cooler waters southwest of Cabo San Lucas. So the Hurricane Center, you know, thinking maybe a little bit of wind shear could hinder the intensification, but it might just ignore that. So it might peak out higher than the 105 and finally comes down below hurricane status this weekend once it gets to the cooler water. Now, why is it still called Bonnie? Well, it's only the second time that we've ever used an Atlantic name on the East Pacific side. The first time was Otto in 2016 because it got named here. It was at least a depression across Central America, kept that name. Before the year 2000, these basin crossers had to get their name changed. So Caesar 96 became Douglas, Joan 1988 became Miriam. So this crossing Central America as a tropical cyclone has happened before. It just hasn't kept the Atlantic name until Otto in 2016, and then now Bonnie this year. Now, this is headed way out west, south of Mexico, because of that hot ridge that is going to be dominating over the U.S. And we just have to watch maybe this weekend for another frontal boundary that could have some areas of spin off the east coast of the U.S., close to the Carolinas, just like we did over the weekend. Here's that front that has absorbed Collin for now, but we had a short spin up on Saturday, if you missed it. Short-lived weak tropical storm Alex. I think if that one was out to sea, I doubt it would have gotten named. That was to warn the folks on the coast.
All right, let's take a look at the tropics. Let's start with the good news. Big label on the map. No tropical activity expected over the next several days. That's the good news. We are still tracking Bonnie. Remember, it was a potential tropical cyclone all of last week. Then it became a tropical storm crossing over Central America and then becoming a hurricane over here in the eastern Pacific waters. In fact, not just a hurricane, a Category 2 that's going to be strengthening as we go throughout the day today. 105-mile-per-hour winds. It's moving west-northwest at 17 miles per hour. And even though it's moving away from Mexico, we're still seeing the impacts along the coastline, moisture streaming up in that direction. So we are still dealing with showers, thunderstorms, not so much the highest wind. The wind is certainly right around the eye, which every once in a while is poking out there from our central dense overcast. But we certainly see the purple. That indicates the higher, colder cloud tops. And that's also where we have the stronger winds within that eye wall. But, you know, it's not too often we see these storms kind of maintain their status of a tropical system crossing from one basin to the other. It's less likely to happen going from the Pacific side into the Atlantic side. Going back to records that go back to 1842, that's only happened 5 times. Going the other way around, just like Bonnie did, the Atlantic to the Pacific side, we've had 15 of those storms do that. So this is a Bonnie with the wind. It is interacting with the water, so those waves are emanating out from the center of our storm. And yes, there will be some strong waves as well as the rip currents. That's going to be a risk too along these Mexican resort towns of Acapulco up towards Manzanillo, where we could see 1 to 2 inches of rain, the heaviest rain offshore as our hurricane continues to move away toward the west. But check this out. Yeah, it's expected to strengthen a little bit more today, 110 miles per hour into Wednesday early morning, and then gradually do some weakening as it encounters some cooler air along that westward track, finally dropping back down to tropical storm status by the time we get to the latter half of the weekend. Jordan, I'll end with this. Very warm sea surface temperatures. It's a good thing we don't have anything really going on right now because, yeah, that's just one factor we look at.
Yeah, but we are jumping into a more active time frame, so hopefully we can keep it dormant as long as possible.
All right, let's get a look at what's happening in the tropics. We've now got Hurricane Bonnie, of course, in the eastern Pacific, Dr. Nab. This is pretty rare that we've got a storm that forms in the Atlantic and then becomes a powerful hurricane in the East Pac.
Yeah, it's happened before, but it doesn't happen all that often where it stays the same tropical cyclone all the way across Central America. You might not realize it's actually quite common for the tropical waves to cross, and most East Pacific tropical storms and hurricanes form from African easterly waves. It's just that they don't usually form here, stay a tropical cyclone all the way across, and then become a hurricane. And remind a major hurricane that Bonnie has become. Now, overall, less conducive conditions have been moving from the East Pacific to the Atlantic. And I think after Bonnie, the East Pacific is going to struggle a little bit to produce storms just like on the Atlantic side. But for now, we've got ourselves a Cat 3, a major hurricane. This has just taken advantage of the warm waters and the weak shear and the very robust system that this has always been, even when it was PTC2. But isn't it nice that all that time it spent interacting with land, it didn't really act up and become really strong until it is staying away from land. So at least give Bonnie some credit for that, even though it did interact with land quite a bit. Now, we have a tropical wave here coming out of Central America that has a chance to develop. You'll see in the models. But for now, we got to watch Bonnie. And good thing with the weak wind shear, upper level high pressure, and the warm waters, that it's not really close to land, and it will hold on to a lot of its intensity until it gets to those cold waters southwest of Cabo San Lucas. And look at the cold water wake that Bonnie has left behind. These colder than average waters are because of the tropical storm and then hurricane eating up some of the energy, but it's got warmer than average waters to tap into for the next couple of days. But look it up here at Zihuatanejo and Manzanillo. They're not getting the direct effects, but rip currents and surf. But that is a pretty but ugly hurricane, if you know what I mean. Going to be holding on to hurricane status until the weekend when it gets to the cooler waters. Then, when you look at this tropical wave and this one, and then the disturbance up in the Gulf, what do the models do with all that? We got to continue to watch close to home. Well, not a whole lot. This tropical wave, watch as it goes into the Pacific. By the weekend, it looks like it will probably develop. But Alex, we just got to watch close to home again, like we did this past weekend with Collin.
Yeah, you know, the month of July, we change a little bit where we watch, but it seems close to home still remains kind of top of mind.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, sometimes July can be quiet compared to what we're going to have in August and September, and that mountaintop graphic shows that. But it doesn't mean that July can't really act up. And when you look at what happens in the East Pacific versus the Atlantic, it's not at all unusual for the East Pac to be ahead of the Atlantic. In fact, in terms of the first 4 storms that we've had, we're a little bit ahead of schedule in the East Pacific. And then when you look at the number of hurricanes, on average, you get 3 hurricanes like we've had in the East Pacific by the end of July. So we're ahead of schedule on that. And we usually get our first major hurricane by July 15th, and now we've got that. So it's usually the case that the East Pacific is ahead of the Atlantic. But Alex, just wait. After we get through July, I think this season on the Atlantic is going to ramp up on schedule.
I will too, Alex, but you know what? There's some good news in the tropical Atlantic. Development is not likely over the next several days. You can see that here. As expected by the National Hurricane Center, we don't think development in the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea, or the Atlantic is going to be likely, certainly this next several days and probably into the middle of the month. But that's not the case over parts of the Pacific. We've got a hurricane, a raging hurricane, Bonnie, right now, probably at or near peak intensity at 105 miles per hour, moving west at, let's see, 12 miles per hour. So Bonnie originally formed over the Atlantic and the Caribbean, crossed over Central America, retained its name. We'll talk about that in a minute, but is still a hurricane as it continues to move west over the Pacific water, and that means that it's moving away from land. So there's very good news here for Mexico. Clear skies. There's no weather impact over even the coast of Mexico and or Central America. But that's a good thing because we want no part of Bonnie. This is a pretty angry looking hurricane on the satellite presentation. There is an eye here, and apparently the circulation is still very intense as estimated by the satellite and data that we can accumulate, suggesting that this is still a very potent hurricane kicking up some giant waves over the Pacific Ocean that in swells are making it to the beaches, perhaps across parts of America, Central America and Mexico. But Alex, the good news here is that Bonnie is moving away from the coast and will be weakening over the much cooler waters in the coming days.
Let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Nab, now. You know, Dr. Nab, we're early in hurricane season, but that doesn't mean that we're immune to impactful catastrophic systems. So as we begin July, we've seen tropical systems that can produce rain just like that.
Yeah, and you might not think that July is capable of producing some really strong hurricanes and a lot of damage and even a lot of casualties. And unfortunately, that has been the case. We can learn a lot from history about how this underrated month can sometimes overproduce in terms of tropical activity, even though it's nothing like the peak of the hurricane season. So when you look at that mountaintop graphic, you see July's average number of storms nowhere near what we see when we ramp up in August and September. But let's look at 5 notorious July hurricanes that can teach us a lot. Dolly in 2008 was a Cat 1 landfall there in deep South Texas, kind of like Bonnie. It didn't form as the wave was moving across the Caribbean until it got to the West Caribbean. It was a $1 billion storm, and there was a drowning from surf in the Florida Panhandle. You don't have to be near landfall for it to be dangerous. The first of 2 Berthas on our list is from 2008. It didn't make landfall. It was a Cat 3 in the open Atlantic on July 7th. Tropical storm conditions in Bermuda, but look at this. 3 drownings on the New Jersey coastline from rip currents, and it's notorious for being the longest-lived Atlantic July tropical cyclone on record. Now, you go back 12 years before that, and you have another Bertha. This was the 1996 version, also in July, Cat 3 northwest of Puerto Rico, a Cat 2 landfall in North Carolina, and there were 12 fatalities more than $250 million in damages for July. You don't usually expect that to happen, do you? Now, we get to the really notorious hurricanes in history in July, and they're both in the same year. This was Emily in 2005, the earliest forming Cat 5 on record in the Atlantic Basin, and the only one to ever happen in the month of July. Landfalls in Grenada, the Yucatan, and northeastern Mexico. 1 fatality in Grenada, 5 in Jamaica, but they evacuated so many people in Mexico, there were no fatalities, amazingly, in that country. And then the most notorious one of all is Dennis. It felt like it was September with a Cat 4 in the Caribbean making landfall in Cuba, Cat 3 landfall in the Florida Panhandle, $2.5 billion storm, 42 direct deaths in multiple countries, including the U.S., 12 indirect fatalities in the U.S. Hopefully the rest of this July is not that bad.
And in the tropics overall, what we saw in that Florida shot was not a lot of thunderstorm activity anywhere near there, and that's going to be the case, I think, for many of us in the Atlantic, Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico for the next several days, and even beyond that, probably toward the middle of the month. It looks relatively inactive in terms of tropical development there, but it's, of course, still very active on the East Pacific side. We have Hurricane Bonnie moving westward. It is a Category 1 hurricane at 90 miles per hour, or at least on estimation from the satellite and other data we get remotely. There aren't any planes flying out in this one. We're just guessing, essentially. Pretty good guess, educated guesses, but about 90 miles per hour, and kicking up huge waves, but the weather impacts along Mexico's beaches, not existent, and none of the weather that we're seeing with Bonnie has anything to do with the weather that we're getting in Mexico in areas in Central America. That's good news there. But look, there's hardly any cloud. We saw that in Florida and in much of the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea. It's nearly cloud-free, and that bodes well for us going forward through the rest of this weekend, and into next week. In terms of the odds of tropical development, they're low. There are going to be some spots that, in terms of the amount of rainfall we get, we'll see above average rainfall, but it's going to be the type of thunderstorm groups that don't turn into tropical systems. They're going to remain there. And elsewhere, it looks relatively good. If you happen to be going on a cruise, for example, toward the Caribbean, it looks really good with the weather conditions across the region. You know what? Let's have a look at the tropics overall, because the Pacific is where it remains active. As we've seen, Bonnie in recent days achieved Category 2 status, but it is moving away and now dissipating in the cooler waters of the Pacific Ocean. A couple of areas to watch and invest there, but the good news on the Atlantic side is development is not likely in the coming days, at least 5, and probably more than that. But keep in mind, the forecasts nearly, if not entirely, unanimously have the consensus that this will be a very busy season hurricane-wise.
In the tropics, we've had our 8th storm of the year. Georgette is the 7th name on the list, but remember we had Bonnie coming from the Atlantic. Could have 2 more systems, especially this eastern one has a decent chance of developing. The one farther west, a 3 out of 10 shot. Now this one is probably going to make it into the Central Pacific if it develops, and August is one of the highest risk times of year for the state of Hawaii. Risk is low at the moment, but it's just the time of year to be watching. 9 out of 10 shot of this tropical wave that is leaving Central America developing here in the East Pacific. But do you know that these tropical waves come all the way from Africa? And where we are right now with this tropical wave, right in here, the timing of this is that it left the west coast of Africa about 9 or 10 days ago. Watch this loop. So here's what's going on now, but watch our long loop here. Here it is last Wednesday and Thursday. It left the coast of Africa Sunday into Monday, and here it is on Friday. And again, the Atlantic's been tropically kind of subdued, so what went through the islands there on Sunday wasn't much, but you can track it as it goes into the Caribbean. Here it is acting up with the convection right there on Monday, and now it's arriving here, Central America, and then crossing. So it's been like a 10-day trip from West Africa to get into the Eastern Pacific, where conditions are more convectively active, more conducive. But when you look at what happened with that wave, Now it's going to have another week or so to develop. So it's going to be more than 2 weeks in existence from leaving Africa to maybe weakening as a former tropical cyclone. And when you think of Charlie, it made landfall here in Florida on August the 13th. It didn't become a depression until August 9th, and the tropical wave that led to it left the west coast of Africa, Mike and Alex, on August the 4th, which is tomorrow. So we're getting into that time of year. I'm not saying Charlie's going to happen this time, but we're getting to that time of year where the next couple waves leaving the west coast of Africa could end up being trouble in the middle to latter part of August.
And turning now to our tropical update.
Right, certified meteorologist Luke Doris is here with what he's been watching out for us today. Luke?
Well, after a month, essentially, of nothing on my maps back here, right on schedule, early August, we expect the tropics to start to wake up a little bit. And indeed, the Hurricane Center now has something that they are giving a chance of developing, 30% odds, low odds right now. But here's the deal. We have this clump of thunderstorms that's racing off of Africa. It's a tropical disturbance, and we should keep an eye on this anyway. It's not concerning, but several models do develop this into a tropical storm. I say not concerning because here we are by Thursday. It's still way out here in the middle of the Atlantic, and it already starts to run into trouble. A lot of dry air around it, and it's going a little too fast, preventing its development. So we'll keep tabs on it. At this point, again, nothing to worry about.
Now at noon, we are wave watching, keeping our eyes on something out in the Atlantic. Meteorologist Erica Delgado is live in the Weather Center with the very latest. Erica.
Alex, in the last month or so, the tropics have been rather quiet for us here over the Atlantic, despite the fact that hurricane season began on June 1st. And that's because we've had a lot of dry air, a lot of Saharan dust that's been moving off of Africa, and that kept all these tropical waves that we've been watching last couple of weeks, I should say, in check. But now there is kind of a break in that dust, and we're seeing a stronger tropical wave that came off of the coast of Africa earlier this week. And the system at one point yesterday was looking a little more organized. Today, the shower activity associated with it, not too impressive, but we're still keeping a close eye on it. Right now, it's a few hundred miles to the southwest of the Cape Verde Islands, and you can see the cloud curve associated with it. Now, the National Hurricane Center is saying that this system will continue to move towards the west, at times towards the west-northwest, through the next couple of days across the tropical Atlantic, and they're saying somewhere within this yellow shaded area, we could see some development through the next couple of days. Now, we're taking a closer look at the models and also the Saharan dust that continues to move off of Africa. You see that placement of the L, that's the system that we're watching as it continues to move towards the west-northwest through the next couple of days. Fast forward into Friday and into the upcoming weekend, that area in yellow, that circle, that's where we're expecting this tropical wave to be. And you can see it's going to have a lot of Saharan dust that it has to battle around it. So conditions are expected to become less favorable for development as we head into the weekend. We'll take a closer look at the tropics plus what's going on locally, some thunderstorms, all this coming up in a few minutes.
Let's bring in Dr. Nab for an update on the tropics. And we know it was an extended period of time where we really didn't have anything to watch. Now the Atlantic, it's starting to wake up. So what's the latest with Invest 97L?
Well, the East Pacific continues to knock on the door of the Atlantic with those favorable conditions. So the Atlantic is getting a little bit more unstable, a little bit more conducive for development, and that includes 97L, which is a tropical wave that's still out in the far eastern Atlantic. And did you know that those tropical waves, if they don't develop out there, can come farther west? Here's a tropical wave here in the western Caribbean. Here's another one in the East Pac. The southern one of the Caribbean one, the southern part of that, is likely to go into the East Pac. The northern part just going to contribute some moisture to our next front. So these left Africa like more than a week ago. This one left Africa just a couple of days ago, and the environment, you see how it's more stable than farther west, not as many thunderstorms. The wind shear is weak. The water is plenty warm if it stays far enough to the south, but still, the stability in the atmosphere is still a little bit of a hindrance. The thunderstorm activity is a little less than yesterday, but that doesn't mean it can't take advantage of those warm waters and make some headway. So the Hurricane Center's not giving it more than a 50-50 shot. The chances are greater that this is going to not develop over the next 5 days, Molly, but we know from history that even if it doesn't develop in the next 5 days in the eastern half of the basin, those waves can be sneaky and show up and develop on our doorstep in the western half of the basin.
Well, you mentioned history. So what can we learn from past storms that have formed in this area, and what do they do?
Yeah, a lot of different things. Now, a lot of them didn't survive. So what I did is I looked at the development area, the waffle cone for 97L, right? And That's a 5-day period here in August. And looking back at history, all the storms that went through that zone. Now, a lot of them didn't survive because they ran into some of the same hindrances that the wave with 97L might. There's upper level mid-oceanic trough here right now that is probably going to hinder 97L's future development chances. It tore Josephine apart in 2020. It prevented Anna from getting too far across. So sometimes they just don't make it very far. But sometimes this time of year, and this is why we have to watch them more closely, the deeper we get into August, some of them can overachieve like Dean did and become a Cat 5 into Mexico. That seems unlikely in the current scenario. Now, if they develop quickly, they can turn off to the north. So that's one thing that, if you're rooting against development, well, that can have a negative aspect because the sooner it develops, the greater the chances for it to turn. But if it doesn't develop, it can do what Dennis in 1981 did. It fizzled as it went to the Caribbean, and then it redeveloped right near Florida. So, Mike, even if it doesn't develop 97L in the next few days, it could be sneaky and show up maybe a little more than a week from now, try to develop right on our front yard.
All right, we are tracking the tropics out there, Luli, and I got good news for everybody.
Okay, what's that?
Well, that little system you're talking about, that little wave here, it's kind of diminished.
Okay, well, that's great news.
It really is great news out there. The thunderstorms have decreasing coverage out there, so they're no longer giving it probabilities and saying no development is expected over the next 5 days. There are 2 other waves, one here southwest of the Cape Verde Islands, where this was a few days ago, and another healthier wave coming off the African coast. So technically 3 tropical waves out there, and even though the thunderstorms look pretty healthy on the eastern waves, we still have that Saharan air layer pouring off of the African coast here, getting lofted 10 to 15,000 feet in the atmosphere. And because of that, that's one of the reasons why those waves are not expected to develop, and nothing expected over at least the next 5 days. But like I've been saying, we are right through the busy period now from mid-August to mid-October, where there will likely be a big ramp up in storms. Once that Saharan dust thins out, and it might take another week or so, we'll be seeing storms named. Of course, that peak comes along on September 10th, and we do look for this area of storms to develop. And again, some of the tracks could be towards the U.S. and also Florida. Nothing out there now. We'll keep you posted.
It is time now for our tropical updates.
Chief Certified Meteorologist Betty Davis is here to show us what she's watching. Hi, Betty. Good afternoon. I've got my eye on this disorganized area of shower thunderstorm activity over the Gulf of Mexico. This action is tied to an area of low pressure just off the southeast coast of Louisiana. National Hurricane Center is looking at it and giving it a low chance of developing over the next couple days. Note the development potential is at 10%. So forecast models, this one showing this system drifting over toward the Texas coast as we move through the weekend. At this point, as I mentioned, the development potential is low. Either way, it looks as though this will be poised to bring some rainfall, some tropical rains into Texas, a state that has been dealing with extreme to exceptional drought, so the rainfall would be beneficial. I'll be back in a few minutes with a look at our weather right here at home. We'll talk about a return to afternoon thunderstorms. Eden.
I am Molly McCullum, and our storm specialist, Dr. Postel, is standing by in the lab. And he is standing by because if you take a live look at Houston, we have potentially some rain coming our way. Now, looking at this, you would say, hey, what rain? That is moving in hopefully later today and tomorrow with some tropical moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Points to the south, and you're talking even more rain. Storm specialist Dr. Postel watching the system tagged as Invest 98L. And so we're wondering, this being so close to home already, does this have a chance of having a name?
Not much of one, Molly and Paul, just flat out. There's really an unlikely scenario this thing gets a name and becomes a lot better organized. There's just not enough time, not enough room, and some other factors, too, that are sort of complicating the picture. But it is an area of unsettled weather in the western Gulf of Mexico with, according to the Hurricane Center, a 10% chance of this thing becoming a tropical cyclone, which would be either a depression or above that, a named storm. So we're going to be dealing with this system probably for about another 24 hours or so before it all moves inland over southwest Texas, roughly along a path outlined like this. So it's going to be moving roughly in that direction. And again, it's not like there's one concentrated area of bad weather. Everything's kind of loosely organized. Things are kind of slowly circulating around a weak area of low pressure. So it's not like you can say, aha, there it is, it's inland, the rain is over. This is more like kind of a rainy and cloudy period for the Western Gulf. And you can see that right now on the radar charts clearly. There is some spin there. Yeah, but not much, and it's going to be bringing, again, rain more than we would typically see on your mid-August afternoon. Here's some of the observations that are coming on board. You can see the winds are generally parallel to or even offshore. So right now, certainly coastal flooding not an issue, but perhaps freshwater flooding, maybe if the rain comes in hard enough later on tonight and tomorrow. The water temperatures are very warm, mid to upper 80s, certainly warm enough to support tropical development, but we're not really going to see it. Look at the breadth of this circulation overall. It's just so big. It's just this ill-defined sort of gyre that's going to be rumbling around its way toward the west like this going through the afternoon and late evening hours. I do think the area of low west pressure will probably cross the coast, I would say early tomorrow morning, maybe late morning, and then inland. And then that's it for the chance for tropical development. But look, it's going to bring heavy rain all the way westbound into Mexico. Paul.
Just a live look at Galveston right now and some of the piers there. Temperatures, a typical summer Sunday in Galveston. Temperatures already in the mid to upper 80s here. Had some rain showers earlier, although we do expect more dry time, maybe a passing shower or two. Nothing unusual for the day, but as we head a little farther south along the Texas coast, Dr. Postel, we are tracking a kind of a tropical mess, which is bringing us some rain and the potential for flooding.
Yeah, an area of low pressure has moved inland over South Texas. And, you know, we talked about this yesterday. It was outlined by the Hurricane Center as an invest, and still, I guess, technically is 98L being monitored for the well, at least yesterday anyway. Was there some chance that this area of low pressure could evolve into a tropical depression or a named storm? And with only 10 or 20% chance as of yesterday, that was pretty clear it wasn't likely to happen because there wasn't enough time over water and away from land, and there wasn't enough space, and some of the other atmospheric conditions around it weren't right suited for it. So still, we're dealing with this, again, area of low pressure, which is something that's not uncommon, I might add, that comes on shore every now and then into parts of the coastal sections of the United States. This one, now inland, doesn't really pose a tropical threat anymore, but what it's got is not the wind, it's the rain that's going to bring with it. And there could be some flooding rain at that, with very heavy rainmakers in a tropical atmosphere locally. So we'll be watching it. And there's where the circulation center is, aloft somewhere around there, not far from Kingsville. Again, the radar composites are looking at the circulation that is some distance above the ground. They're trying to figure that out and triangulate it, but it's above the ground. And the surface circulation is probably a little bit farther to the east from there. But still, either way, it's not the wind, it is the rain. And you can see we're going to having rain with this low pressure that's going to continue to rumble its way westward across southern Texas, and then eventually tonight probably into Mexico as it crosses the Rio Grande. So there it is right here. You can see a lot of rain from Corpus on south through Brownsville and areas nearby. All the wonderful towns in South Texas in between. Heads up, it is going to be a rainy time of it. South Padre along the coast, we're going to see some of that. And then by tomorrow morning or lunchtime, say noon, a little bit thereafter, for the most part, the weather will be a lot better than it is now. Less rainy, showers here and there, but overall more like an average August day by tomorrow afternoon. How much rain will fall between now and, say, tomorrow afternoon? Well, another couple of inches in spots. Locally, 1 to 2, maybe 3 inches. Some of there's areas shaded in yellow. The modeling is picking up over 3 inches of rain, which is certainly possible given on how impactful these systems are, and they can be. So overall, in the bigger picture, it really has only focused its attention, this area of low pressure, to southern Texas. Much of the Lone Star State was unimpacted, not impacted by the rain. It was only in a smaller area across the Lone Star State, as I mentioned, in that zone. But still, we need it there. We need rain here overall in the southern plains. It's been so hot and so dry, Paul. Yes, the rain has come too much at once in some cases with some flooding risk, but the rain certainly does help alleviate this issue.
Our tropical depression-ish 98L thing is doing everything a tropical depression does. And in fact, to me right now, it looks like a tropical depression. They're not going to go back and add this to the database later, and it wouldn't have changed anything to start issuing advisories once it hit the coast and got a better defined circulation. We wouldn't have had tropical storm warnings. flash flooding, the rainfall, the tornadoes still would have been the main focus to deal with. But putting this in a broader context, back out a little bit and you realize that this system is happening in a part of the Atlantic basin that is getting into really where, in the east-west sense, the East Pacific is. And this has been the zone that has been far more unstable than farther east in the Atlantic. And, you know, these two systems look awfully similar, and they are farther west. And this has been kind of the dividing line: unstable this way, stable this way. So that is kind of consistent with the overall sense of things, that the unstable conditions from the East Pacific are probably just kind of, for lack of a better way to describe it, knocking on the Atlantic basin's door, and more unstable conditions, which are easier to come by the later you get into August, are headed our way. Look how stable it still is. Lack of convection out here. It's not because we don't have it's not because there's too much wind shear. Look at this upper level high pressure here. There's not wind shear tearing apart thunderstorms. There aren't thunderstorms to tear apart to begin with. Look how quiet it is. My goodness. Here's a tropical wave, though, acting up as it gets closer to the Pacific side. You get the theme here. The water temperatures are warm enough in most of the Atlantic Basin development areas, and they are warmer than average, save for parts of the subtropical Atlantic. So over the last few weeks, let's look at those three factors. Sea surface temperatures being one. In these red areas, temperatures have generally been at the sea surface above average. Gulf of Mexico is always warm enough, and it's even warmer than average. Even the Caribbean, tropical Atlantic, the rest of the subtropical Atlantic, generally, depending on exactly where you are, have been near average or maybe above average in a lot of places. In terms of wind shear, these redder areas are where weaker wind shear, more conducive for development, has been going on. Last few weeks, tropical Atlantic, the wind shear has been weaker than average. It's been near average, ups and downs in the Caribbean. Gulf of Mexico, East Coast, a little weaker than average. So wind shear has not been the problem for the most part basin-wide. But the instability has been below average for the most part. Closer you get to farther west, as we saw with 98L, the more unstable it's been getting. And off the East Coast, it's been pretty stable compared to average, but really stable compared to average over most of the rest of the Atlantic Basin. We've seen this before. 2019 played out much like this up to this date. It got all calm out there. We had Barry end on July 15th. August 20th is when Chantal finally came around, and then we had Dorian. Mike, I fear the Atlantic will wake up in a nasty way before too much longer.
More active than we've seen them as of late. We, of course, have our system in the East Pac, but a little entity here into Central America. And notice, at least there's, some energy coming off. It's not totally dead coming off the MDR, but it is super duper quiet. And we don't see any of these waves that are, super impressive as of right now. But I'll tell you what, things can change on a dime in the tropics. Something might not look impressive, like Andrew, for instance. Hurricane Andrew, when it was, coming off the wave, it didn't look very impressive. In fact, everyone kind of was like, nothing's going to happen with this. And the thing just exploded. So that's something to keep in mind. This clouds, showers, and convection has a small chance of development, 20% chance of development. But, you don't really need a named system in order to cause problems. If this just keeps dumping rain over Nicaragua, Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, all these areas, it can be problematic. Look at the water temperature it's going into. Now, this could potentially, you see them come over this water and they tap into it, and it just it lights up, because right now it's over land, and obviously these things don't develop over land typically. It's more over water. That's really what they need in order to develop. So we watch this piece of energy come over into the Bay of Campeche, and then does it have enough time in order to hit that warm water and turn into a named system? We'll continue to follow that. But again, regardless, it could be bringing rain to Mexico and Texas. Looking out in the MDR, again, you see some flare-ups that we have, but nothing as of right now is catching our eye. But we will continue to watch these areas and the spin that comes off of Africa. You notice we have a little piece of energy that kind of goes north. There's another piece of energy that comes on through, but it doesn't look like they really get it together, though we still have 85% of the hurricane season remaining. And, it only takes one Andrew, it only takes one Matthew, one Michael, one Ivan, just one storm a season that could be devastating not only for one community, but an entire state and really our entire nation. And look at our active season. After September 1st, 2005, 18 storms. 2020 had 17, so this is why you don't want to sleep on the season. Look at the number of storms here that had, you know, a dozen systems develop. So this is just showing you that, you know, Molly, you don't think, oh, okay, well, it's going to be quiet because the beginning of the season started quiet, which is actually more average than anything.
Now, 7 weather with meteorologist Erica Delgado.
Well, the official numbers for today, temperatures reached a high of 96 degrees in Miami, which is a record, beating the old record of 95 degrees set back in 1991. By the way, this is the warmest temperature Miami has gotten so far this year. As a matter of fact, since last year, September 1st. 94 was the high in Fort Lauderdale, 91 in Key West, remaining dry through much of the day, and now we're beginning to see some of those thunderstorms developing. Still 96 in Miami, currently 93 in Pompano Beach and in Pembroke Pines, 89 currently down in Key West. Now, storm tracker picking up on a few downpours and now some isolated thunderstorms developing across some of our inland suburbs. All this activity pushing towards the east, and you can see some thunderstorms now moving offshore here, moving away from our coastline. In Broward County, isolated downpours near Pompano Beach, but we are seeing some thunderstorm activity along 595 near Weston. A little farther south across portions of Miami-Dade. Here in North Bay Village, we saw some showers pushing through. Now just seeing a few showers near Surfside and across our beaches. Now shifting focus, we've been seeing a lot of dry air over us here, but we've been keeping a close eye down in the Caribbean, where now the National Hurricane Center is keeping an eye on a tropical wave that could see some development through the next couple of days. Now this system right here is moving towards the northwest. It's expected to push through Central America through the next couple of days, but the National Hurricane Center is saying that by the weekend, the system, as it moves northwest, may re-emerge over portions of the Gulf of Mexico, and at that point we could see some development. Likely this will be a rainmaker for portions of Mexico and through the coast of Texas. Recon is set for Friday to investigate this system. No threat for South Florida right now. There's a low development chance through the next 2 to 5 days.
Hey, it's hurricane season. It's mid-August. Not a lot going on out there, at least for now. But there may be some reasons for that. Let's head down to the Grove and check in with hurricane specialist John Morales. John, nice to see you. It's been very inactive. What's going on?
I tell you what, the main driver for that is stability. The air is stable across the tropical Atlantic, and that's preventing storms from forming. Check out how we've progressed so far. We've had 3 named storms, and that's only 1 below what you'd expect by this time of the year. In other words, by around this time on the calendar, you would expect to have 4 storms, and we've got 3. So, you know, we're running a little bit behind normal there. As a matter of fact, I'll jump down here to the number of hurricanes we've had, 0 so far. Normally we'd have 1, but then check out this statistic. Named storm days, simply the number of days that we've had with named storms. Well, we're down by almost a dozen days in terms of what's going on with the number of named storm days. As a matter of fact, we've had such a long streak already of days without named storms that we just tied. Check this out. We tied the 3rd longest streak since the year 1995 with 46 straight days now between July 3rd and August 18th that we haven't had a named storm out there. Now, the 2 longest streaks are 2007 and 1999. Now, let me tell you, 2001 and 2007 were at or below normal in terms of hurricane activity, but 1999 was hyperactive, and we had a landfall here in South Florida named Hurricane Irene, which was definitely a big problem and actually caused some fatalities here in South Florida. 1999's Hurricane Irene. We've got a long way to go in the season. We're still getting ramped up to the busiest part of it. We'll be talking more about this 2022 season and what to look for ahead. That'll be during the 6 o'clock newscast. Now back to you.
But first, talking tropics, because we could have a situation of our own here, Dr. Nab, in the coming days.
Yeah, and don't go to sleep tonight thinking that 30% is locked in. And a lot of times people say 50% or less, and they go, oh, it's not going to form. You see greater than 50%, you think it's going to form. These numbers can change, Chris. And the reason why they could go up is because the system is still over land. And once it gets over water, we've got tomorrow morning, if it is looking even healthier than it has today over land, 2 days is more than enough time for a depression to form.
And there's a big difference between a little circulation over land and a circulation that's over the water.
Yes, because these waters are into the mid-80s, and the reason it has looked fairly interesting over land today is it's already tapping into the warm water surrounding the Yucatan Peninsula, but also look at the atmosphere in general. Upper level high pressure, weak wind shear. The upper level low that if it were to stay in the Gulf could provide wind shear. It's moving back. Look at that upper level high pressure, weak wind shear warm waters in 2 days could mean the development of a system.
And right here, it's hard to kind of make out exactly where, but it does look like there's something going on right here, Dr. Knapp.
Yeah, I think this is some convectively induced mid-level spin in here, but in the bigger picture, the low-level clouds have been going around in here. But the low-level spin, once it gets out over water tomorrow morning, then we'll have a better idea what's going on. And it's at that moment that the hurricane specialists on the ops floor of the Hurricane Center will decide, okay, do I know enough about what's going on just using satellite imagery, or do I need to send the plane to find out what's going on? And the more convection that's obscuring the low-level clouds, the more they're going to need that plane tomorrow.
And tomorrow also, Dr. Knapp, on Storm Center, we're going to talk to some of the hurricane hunters.
Yes.
There are a lot of questions, especially since it's been kind of quiet lately.
Yeah, we'll see what they've been doing in terms of maintaining the aircraft and getting the crew ready for flights that could all of a sudden become a lot more frequent, because not only do we have this development potential, we've got stuff out in the eastern Atlantic that could be coming our way later next week. But look at the low-level spin with the colors, the white lines showing the upper-level high pressure, and that's enough time over water, and it could get to near the Texas-Mexico border like 48 hours from now.
And regardless if it does or doesn't develop, there's going to be moisture with it.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. And we can also learn from history how quickly things can develop. I don't think we're going to get a Brett, because that had 3 days over water from becoming a depression to a landfalling major hurricane. But Hermine formed here as a depression in the far southwestern Gulf, and in less than a day and a half made landfall as a strong tropical storm right near the Texas-Mexico border.
That's what the green is right there.
Yeah, and that went up into northern Texas and caused problems in Dallas with flooding and tornadoes.
All right, thanks, Dr. Knapp. Let's back over to Collin.
The tropics, and that's where we focus in now with this invest area, which is seeing the opportunity, at least the chance, according to the National Hurricane Center, go up just a bit in terms of its opportunity to try to develop.
Indeed, a tropical depression may be forming, which is basically an area of low pressure with some thunderstorms attached to it that has a chance of evolving even further, perhaps into a tropical storm. We'll see. That's a long way to go, but right now we're watching this area of unsettled weather, but it doesn't have much time, right, before it gets eventually inland, about 36 hours or so before we think it moves into Mexico, bringing heavy rain, and that will impact for sure parts of southern Texas with some rain as well. So be on the lookout for this as it moves in that direction during the next 1 to 2 days. So as Alex was mentioning, the odds have come up a little bit from this thing turning from an area of unsettled weather into technically a tropical depression. 60% chance now of that happening. I think it's in the process of doing that already. We're sort of seeing an area of low pressure emerge from this region, but you know what? The hurricane hunters are going to be in there this afternoon, and they'll tell us a lot more about what's going on in the interior, which is something that we really can't see from here in the satellite pictures or the surface observations. They're relatively sparse, right? There's some buoys here. There's some surface and airport observations there. But the big picture is clear that there is some kind of area of low pressure not far from those thunderstorms. And any time in the tropics you get a flare-up of storms and some thunderstorms and an area of low pressure, you got to watch it because it could strengthen. And in this part of the tropics, in the western Gulf of Mexico, sometimes things strengthen pretty quickly. Now, the good news here with this one is that there's not really any guidance, any model data that's telling us that's going to strengthen really quickly. There's a lot of reasons for it, but overall, the bottom line is the consensus is that the surface pressures remain relatively high, and that is in part because some strong wind sheer aloft is going to be impacting it, guys, the entire time. So heavy rain, probably the biggest impact, Mexico and southern Texas tomorrow and tomorrow evening.
This is Storm Center here on the Weather Channel, and breaking just a few moments ago, the National Hurricane Center has initiated advisories on potential tropical cyclone 4. This is the first time the Hurricane Center has written advisories on an Atlantic system for a month and a half since Collin. So this is the fourth system of the year. Now, why potential tropical cyclone? Well, as I'll describe here, the Hurricane Hunter data from the Air Force have shown we don't have a closed circulation, certainly not a well-defined one, even though we got a lot of thunderstorm activity, but we still have the high likelihood that this will become a depression or storm over the next day to day and a half as it approaches northeastern Mexico and deep south Texas. So it's time to get tropical storm warnings up. And we now have a tropical storm warning up from Port Mansfield, Texas, just north of Brownsville. So it includes South Padre, but not Corpus Christi. And that goes down into northeastern Mexico. So tropical storm warnings are up because we're expecting tropical storm force winds out of this. And we're expecting it to become become a tropical storm before making landfall. At the moment, max winds are at 35 miles an hour and moving northwestward at about 14 miles an hour, about 400 miles south-southeast of the mouth of the Rio Grande. So that's why we've started advisories from the Hurricane Center to get those tropical storm warnings up, and we'll detail those locations of those warnings here in just a little bit. Here is the forecast track and intensity from the Hurricane Center. It's not a tremendous amount of intensification because it only has a little more than a day over water. This point here would be valid tomorrow afternoon at around 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Time, and then a few more hours after that before the center would come ashore somewhere in northeastern Mexico. Maybe it makes landfall in extreme southern Texas, but in any case, the circulation center might get a little bit into southern Texas, but not much farther north than that. And we'll talk about what that means for points farther north with moisture in a little bit. But for now, it has enough time over water to get its act together and get that closed circulation, become a tropical depression and then tropical storm, and then strengthen a little bit. It's just a matter of not having enough time. If it had more time over water, it could get a lot stronger than that. We'll get the tropical storm warnings up there in a little bit. Now, here's what we've got going on. We've got a front here along the northern Gulf Coast, and we've got our tropical system down here. And it's a relatively small system, and that's sometimes a concerning feature because small systems can organize and ramp up more quickly. So it's at least possible that this could get stronger than the Hurricane Center's first advisory here. But it's relatively small, and the flow is going into it only in the southern half of the Gulf of Mexico. Up north, things are flowing up into that front. Now, you might be thinking, if you look at the water vapor, look at this trough here. Don't troughs tend to pick up tropical systems and bring them north? Well, if that trough were to stay there, yes, but we're going to have ridging building back in this way, so that's going to keep our tropical system farther south and west than would otherwise be the case. Upper level low here and here, upper level high in the middle, so weak wind shear and a favorable environment for some organization and strengthening over those warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And again, we have sparse surface observations. That's why it's so important that we had the hurricane hunters in there. And again, it sure looks like a tropical depression or storm, doesn't it? But even though we've got the strong southerly flow into here, we don't have the winds bending around like this yet in a very well-defined way. It's kind of a sharp trough. And we know that because of the hurricane hunter data. This is the Air Force hurricane hunters from Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, and they flew through from the northeast to the southwest. They did get some winds close to tropical storm force, but that might have been rain inflated. And then we look at the wind directions. It's mostly been out of the south and southeast most of the time. Occasionally it's turned around to north, but so we just keep getting winds like this, but not bending around very sharply that way. So until it has that, it's not going to be declared a depression or storm, but colors show the low-level spin heading up into northeastern Mexico over the next 24 hours ahead of that ridge. But this is not going to get much farther north of the Texas-Mexico border, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to have effects farther north with this system, because we're going to bring a lot of moisture northward. But the system itself will get hung up in northern Mexico and fall apart over the mountains there. Hermine went from a depression to a strong tropical storm in 2010 in about a day and a half. So this one has that potential as well. So I've shown you how important today aircraft reconnaissance has been. And the data we've gotten today from the hurricane hunters are from the Air Force.
Here's the very latest on potential storm number 4. The advisory just came in at 11 p.m. for the 11 p.m. time slot. 35-mile-an-hour winds moving northwest at 14, and the forecast cone suggests that it may become Tropical Storm Danielle tomorrow morning. By afternoon, making landfall and then moving quickly inland, should come to an end sometime on Sunday morning with 35-mile-per-hour winds.
Good morning, everyone. Tracking the tropics, time is 5:09. Potential tropical cyclone number 4 still in the Gulf of Mexico. It doesn't have a close circulation just yet. That's why it hasn't been named to Tropical Storm Danielle, but it will likely become Danielle before making landfall in Mexico and the southern tip of Texas, producing a lot of rain in the next 24 to 48 hours. So the latest forecast track takes it towards the northwest into Mexico and then as a low pressure system over Texas. And mudslides, flash flooding will be possible with this system in the next couple of days.
All right, hey, half past the hour right now as Weekend Recharge is rolling on. I'm Paul Goodlow.
And I'm Molly McCullum. The tropics, well, they are starting to stir, and our storm specialist, Dr. Greg Postel, is watching closely. So we want to get right over to him for the very latest on PTC.
PTC4, Molly and Paul, thank you guys, is potential tropical cyclone number 4. And it is not that far away from the southern tip of Texas, right about there on the satellite pictures. And what we're dealing with is a system that's got some thunderstorms with it. Not much of a wind factor. It is moving toward the northwest at 13 miles per hour. And the latest location is about 165 miles to the southeast of the Rio Grande. So you do the math, you get a little bit more than 10 hours away from making landfall. So this thing has very little time left to get its act together if it wants to become a tropical depression or a named storm. I don't think it will. The system is actually looking messier and messier with each passing hour. There are environmental factors that are interfering with its attempt to get better organized, and I don't think it will. I just don't think there's enough time or room. But the hurricane hunters are in there right now giving us a better picture of what's happening on the inside, because what we know right now really is from the outside in a lot of ways, right? We can see it from the satellite pictures. There it is right there. There's the area of interest, and it's got some thunderstorms that are relatively transient. They're not very durable. They're flaring up and collapsing, and the surface observations that we do have, although widely spaced, not close to one another, they're showing us a predominantly southeast wind. However, as I said, the hurricane hunters are in there doing their incredible work for us to give us a better picture of where there might indeed be at least some rotation to that low-level wind. And in fact, right around in there, they found perhaps a broad, weak area of spin and associated area of low pressure. But there are very few thunderstorms there, fewer than there were even 12 hours ago. And looking at the radar charts coming into Brownsville, there's just not much there. This is an outflow dominant system that is not going to be able to tighten up its circulation, I don't think, in the few remaining hours it's got before it moves inland. So that will be, I think, about it by about midnight tonight. The show is over, and I don't think this is going to become our next named storm.
And while we could use some more rain, residents in South Texas preparing for a deluge as a tropical system approaches. First Alert meteorologist Kate Wenzel here with a look at where that is right now. Kate?
Yeah, John, it is pushing onshore and will continue to do so overnight into early Sunday morning. And this is going to be a rainmaker for folks in northeastern Mexico and southeastern Texas. And Mexico looks to get the heaviest rains. You can see the hurricane hunters were flying through the system earlier, and it's a relatively weak system, potential tropical cyclone number 4. So you can see, though, already some heavy rain expanding into portions of Mexico. So a couple things we need to keep in mind. There is a tropical storm warning for northeastern Mexico and southeastern Texas. Isolated flash flooding will be possible, especially for Mexico. Heavy rainfall across South Texas up to about 5 inches, and they could see a storm surge up to about a foot. Now, we're also tracking something on the other side of the Atlantic basin. It's a tropical wave just emerging off the coast of Africa. This has a 20% chance of development in the next 5 days. Of course, when things move off the coast of Africa, they're still a good 2 weeks away from any potential impact here in South Florida.
Time to talk tropics and the system putting parts of Texas on alert.
Certified meteorologist Luke Doris is here with a look at that and another area of development. Luke, what are you looking at?
We'll start here in Texas. Take a look at the satellite. Do you see any bright colors around where the center, supposed center of this disturbance was? No, you don't. There's nothing here. Precisely 0 storms. It has moved inland. The warnings have been dropped. This thing is done. It's not going to develop. Hurricane Center will be done tracking that. That's their last advisory on it. But it has a lot of moisture. That moisture is going to meet up with this front, and drought-stricken Texas is going to get a lot of rain. They'll have some isolated flooding, but this is good news as they need that rain. Here's what we have in the deep tropics in the far eastern Atlantic. Low chance of development here, but there's a disturbance that's coming off of Africa. You can see this cluster of thunderstorms here, and this will move westward across the Atlantic. We'll keep an eye on it this week, but we still have all that dusty, dry air around. It's going to have to fight that off. Has its work cut out for it. That's why the odds of it developing are low. So we'll just kind of keep tabs on it.
All right, let's check in with meteorologist John Gerard. I wish our temperatures would go into a recession, don't you?
Yeah, a little bit of a depression with the temperatures would feel kind of nice, but it is August. You got to be realistic now. Hey, good news in the tropics, though. Considering it's late August, things are really relatively quiet. That system we were watching yesterday came ashore in northeastern Mexico. Some heavy rain for South Texas. Otherwise, no development expected except for this little system that just came off the Cape Verdes yesterday, and the National Hurricane Center says keep an eye on that. It's got about a 20% chance for development somewhere in that yellow spot in the tropical Atlantic in the next 5 days. The Cape Verde season is now upon us, so that's the area we're going to be watching very closely for the next several weeks. A few showers out there this morning, otherwise a mix of clouds and sunshine. It'll be a hot one, 92.
All right, guys, let's talk about the tropics. Of course, for the first time since 1982, we have not had a named tropical system from July 3rd to present date. Thank you, Phil Klotzbach, for that. We've also got the lowest ACE in the Atlantic Basin that we've seen since 1988. What is that? Accumulated cyclone energy. How many storms have we had? How long have they lasted? What intensity have they been? We haven't had a hurricane yet. And we usually, I think, have our first one by now. That's actually a good question. Now, what makes up this graphic, obviously, you know, it depends on how much cyclone energy you got. So we're not that far off. Obviously, if we get into the middle of September and we haven't had a storm yet, then you're way far off. Because look at this graph. It goes up exponentially. So we expect an increase in the system. So now, the system, the season, I should say. So 90L. And then this new area to watch, which came out at 8 a.m. from the Hurricane Center this morning. Now, they dropped 90L down to 10% because nobody really does anything with this model-wise. And what was interesting is they took out the western flank of this hatched mark. So now they have the current X. It's not going to develop for 48 hours, and then it has a 10% chance of developing, which isn't much behind that. Here's this new 20% area, which comes from this, which is already swirling around over Africa. This heads out toward the Cabo Verdes, and then has a chance to develop. You know, what does this show? This shows an indication of the main development region starting to wake up a little bit, okay? And there's even more behind that, and I'll show you that in a second. So here's this area that is now the new 20%, sitting over the Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso, all right? That's what's going to come out as we go into next week. Now, just because it looks good now doesn't mean it's spinning and going crazy once it gets out into the MDR, right? Because we've got water temperatures to consider, we've got shear, we've got, you know, dust and stable air. But let's take a look at all of these. All right, here's Tuesday. Here's that system right here. So let's watch this as it comes off as we go on in time. Oh, look at that. All right, so that becomes something. That becomes something, at least from the GFS model. There's another system behind that. There's another system behind that. Is this a sign of things coming alive? By the way, there's whatever 90L becomes. So it doesn't do much with it. This is the same time, Tuesday, August 30th, for that same area. So this is the new area that they're just watching. This is a system behind that and another one behind that. So there is some consistency in the models in showing these situations coming off of Africa, all right? So we'll see. We'll see what we get out of this. Is this the switch, if you will, for the MDR? We don't know. Maybe it's too early to tell.
Well, it's hard to believe 30 years ago, Hurricane Andrew struck South Florida with a force unlike any other. The devastating Category 5 hurricane killed more than 60 people. It destroyed nearly 50,000 homes in South Miami-Dade and caused $26 billion in damage. Stan Goldenberg from the Hurricane Research Division was in Miami with his family when Andrew hit 30 years ago today. Even he admits what they were about to experience 3 decades ago still makes him emotional. Here's First Alert meteorologist John Gerard with our story.
No one was prepared for the power that Hurricane Andrew was about to deliver, not even a NOAA scientist.
It was a surprise at what a Category 5 hurricane could do to a city with as strong of a building code as we had, to houses that weren't affected by storm surge. That really was a surprise. Some people expected, and they certainly expected, a lot of damage, but we had not had a Category 5 storm hit a major city in the U.S. before.
Stan Goldenberg was living in South Florida with his wife and 2 young kids as an expert in hurricane research at the National Hurricane Center's Research Division. Just one day ahead of Hurricane Andrew making landfall, his wife Barbara was in the hospital preparing to deliver their daughter Pearl.
My wife was pregnant. I mean, she was due. I wasn't going anywhere. We were focused on, so here I was, a meteorologist with a major storm moving in, someone who lived in Miami with a major storm heading towards us, and an expectant father. So it was all three things at once.
Jonathan and Danielle.
Stan and the boys did not evacuate. They hunkered down at home. In the dead of night, Andrew approached. The Category 5 hurricane, packing winds of more than 150 miles an hour, slammed their home with such force it ripped the roof off.
Lord, we just thank you. We ask your protection.
Narrowly tossing a refrigerator on top of them.
And when the eye wall hit, it was like someone took a giant gearbox and just revved it up. And all of a sudden, it's like the board was off the front window, board was off the back window, and I'm getting emotional talking about this, and the front window shattered, and the sliding glass door shattered, and the hurricane was just roaring through the house.
They survived. It took years to rebuild. But through all the destruction, Stan says as a scientist and a survivor, preparing the public for the next storm is what drives him.
The whole atmosphere changed in the Hurricane Research Division because we would see a storm coming and we're gung-ho scientists and we're ready to get out there on the planes and fly them and everything's exciting. And I remember for years, and even now to an extent, if we knew there was any landfall possible, there's a real soberness because we start thinking of what's going to happen to those people.
So many stories to tell. That was John Gerard for us there. The effects of Hurricane Andrew proved to be, at the time, the costliest disaster in the state's history, as well as the costliest on record in the U.S., that is, until Hurricane Katrina surpassed it in 2005. It was such a precedent-setting storm 3 decades ago, James, just for the way that we build homes here in South Florida, for the way insurance claims are filed, and for how meteorologists like you forecast these storms now.
Yeah, and so many crazy stories like that, too. I don't know if you know, but Bill Johnson, the Palm Beach County Emergency Management Director, the previous one, his story, it's on YouTube, Google it. It's an incredible story that he had to go through, and he just got to South Florida and, hey, welcome, here you go. So quite amazing. Forecasting has come a long way, because I remember back then, we didn't have that many days' notice. We maybe had a day's notice that it was coming. We knew there was a storm out there, but you see this little curve here is original thinking. It may have recurved, then high pressure built in. Actually, it got sheared apart and ran into some shear right here. And there was some thinking that, hey, maybe it might not make that, but nope. That high built in, pushed it a little bit southward. It went west for a while, due west for a while, and then sunk a little bit southward. It was even with Palm Beach County for a little bit when it was a Category 3 major hurricane out there, but moved through the Bahamas and then out into Louisiana after that. We do have a couple of potential systems out here. Now, nothing like Andrew or anything, but this one not looking too great right now. But down the road, 5-7 days or so, once it gets into the Caribbean, conditions are more favorable, and it could develop into something, scooch underneath us, maybe in the Gulf of Mexico. That's more like just before Labor Day weekend. So we'll keep an eye on that. This one just coming off the coast of Africa. Tomorrow it'll come off the coast of Africa. Does have a chance, not right away, but again, about 5, maybe 7 days down the road.
Right now, it's time for our tropical update. We're keeping an eye on the Atlantic.
Hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry is standing by, but we begin with our Betty Davis, our chief certified meteorologist. Hey, Betty.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are just looking at 5 days left in the month of August, and so far this hurricane season, not a single hurricane, even as we're headed toward that climatological peak in September. So while this may not be unheard of, it does seem unusual. So let's bring in our hurricane expert and storm surge specialist, Michael Lowry. Michael, do you think we'll get all the way through the month of August without a hurricane?
Well, it's kind of looking that way, isn't it? We only have a few days left in the month of August. And as Betty said, it's pretty unusual to get all the way through August without seeing a hurricane. It only happens about once a decade. You can see the years up here. On average, though, we tend to see about 2 hurricanes by the time we get through August. Of course, we haven't had any this year. We've never gone any hurricane season in the modern record without having a hurricane. The latest date that we've seen, the first hurricane form is September 11th. That happened both in September of 2002 and September of 2013. When we look across the Atlantic today on terms of what has any potential of developing over the next few days, we have a disturbance here in the far eastern Atlantic. We have one that is moving into the Caribbean right now. Both of these have a low potential, and you can see the potential area is pretty long, telling us that these are moving fairly quickly, and that's actually some good news for us, at least on the westernmost one of these systems. We have a big ridge of high pressure. We have clockwise steering around the high pressure. That is going to move over our area. Anytime high pressure sits over us, that's a good thing during hurricane season. That's going to guide this leading wave off to the west. The second one, we have plenty of time to watch. We're talking early next week here, where it's not even getting to the islands. Also, some impediments ahead of this one, like we were talking about the last few days, kind of looks like an obstacle course in the Atlantic. We have big upper level dip in the jet stream. That is going to induce some wind shear here through the Caribbean, some dry air here as well. So it doesn't look like there's any significant potential for development with these, at least in the near term. So we could get through August without a hurricane, and that's not something either Betty or I are complaining about.
So amazing. Easy breezy in August. Hopefully September will follow.
We are starting to see signs that activity is picking up in the tropics. And if you just look at the overview, you see it is quite a bit different than even just yesterday. Now we've got 4 things encircled, whereas this time yesterday there were 2. I would still maintain that the 2 most interesting ones, are the ones that are most at risk for development, would be perhaps this one, but more likely Invest 91L. I think this one needs our attention more so than any of the others, at least for now. It's got a whole bunch of stuff going for it, even already. Though it's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, we're going to be watching this one because I think it will be our next named storm down the line. So what it is an area of circulation that's developed along what's called a monsoon trough, which is a little thin strip of low pressure that is a persistent feature of the tropical atmosphere in this part of the world, where at low levels the winds are coming at that little area of low pressure from different angles in different ways. And you can imagine that every once in a while it kind of buckles up, kind of rolls up and wraps up in little areas of low pressure, just like this. And that area of low pressure was there yesterday. It was there the day before. It's a little bit more concentrated now, and it's got more thunderstorms than it did yesterday. So all the while, the circulation is trying to wrap up a little bit on its own. It's now also got some of those thunderstorms. You can see there's quite a few more of them now beginning to pop up and sustain themselves in the area where there's that greatest spin. That means that the odds are going up for development. Now, 70%. I have a feeling those numbers are even going to go up as we go forward the next couple of days. And the odds are that this thing will be close to the northern Caribbean islands by the end of the week. And I think as our next named storm, as it moves kind of along a path like this. So you wonder, all right, let's say it's here. Exactly how strong, we don't know, but somewhere in that zone. What does that mean for the Bahamas? What does that mean for the southeastern United States? We'll talk about that coming up. But we may have a named storm here in about a week's time, not far offshore of the U.S.
Always alerting, always tracking. This is Next Weather.
All right, next weather meteorologist is here with us this morning, keeping our eye on the tropics. Lisette, how's it looking?
Yeah, here we are ending the month of August, and as to be expected, the tropics coming alive and waking up as we have 4 areas that we're monitoring. But the one that we're going to keep the closest eye on is this broad area of low pressure in the central Atlantic that the Hurricane Center is giving an 80% chance, a high potential of development over the next 5 days as it generally moves west-northwest. It's going to move into very warm waters where it has a potential to become a depression. Right now, the model is showing possibly staying to our east, but of course, still too soon to say. A wave off the coast of Africa, a disturbance east of Bermuda, and another wave in the northwestern Caribbean currently just have a low potential of development.
All right, with that in mind, we want to head on down to our hurricane expert, John Morales, at the home office. And John, I know the model's still not in complete agreement on how quickly the system might become a tropical depression, or even Danielle, but pretty good consensus. It's not coming toward us, right? Great news for us.
Yeah, I mean, I liked your outlook for Labor Day weekend, Steve, because I think you've laid it out correctly. We really don't need to necessarily be too worried about what's going on in the tropics for this upcoming Labor Day weekend. Instead, we'll be able to deal with our typical summertime situation here and not worry about what's out there. Now, there are several systems, but the one that most are focusing on is located in the Atlantic, about midway between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. And, you know, you look at it and it's a big, elongated, disorganized mess. But let me try to draw a couple of things for you. We'll take this on the full screen and show you what might be going on here in terms of any potential development. So first of all, out of this big blob, is there a center somewhere? Well, if there is one, If there is one, it might be circulating right up into that area right there, okay? So that is the area we'll be focusing on over the next several days. But here's where we're talking about, right? I just drew it for you. I'm going to relocate the potential area of low pressure located right around here. And look at all the dry air. This is Saharan dust and dry air located to its west. That is definitely going to be detrimental to its development down the road. And it's got upper level wind shear, pretty strong coming up over the next couple of days. Coming up from the southwest, you can see those winds right there. Not only is that detrimental to its development, but more than likely it'll nudge it northbound. That's what you were talking about, Steve. The fact that more than likely it's going to miss the Caribbean, great news, and probably miss Florida. And for now, we just don't see an imminent threat for our region, and that's great news. Now back to the studio.
We'll figure it out. Well, we are closely watching two areas in the Atlantic for possible formation into the next tropical depression or possibly a tropical storm.
And part of the reason we're closely watching because we're approaching the peak of hurricane season. I mean, we're getting into it here, right? I mean, so you would expect something to develop or to get into the unusual nature of what we've seen so far this year. It's been nearly 2 months since we've seen a named tropical system. When you look at the fact that we're getting into, you get the first couple of weeks of September, that leads right up to the peak.
Right, so there's 75% of the season still ahead of us, and that is the lion's share of where we would typically see strong, powerful hurricanes. Now, we've got two different areas that we're keeping our eye on. We've got Invest 91L and a tropical wave that has come off the coast of Africa, and these are not created equally, so to speak, right now, Chris. In fact, Invest 91, this is the one we really need to keep our eye on.
Yeah, but just the fact there's another area to watch is just a reminder that it's that time of year when we get these waves that start coming off of Africa. They don't all make it to the U.S., but the more waves there are, the more chances eventually there could be some interaction with land.
Absolutely. So we want to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, to talk a little bit more about this. And Dr. Knabb, I know you're not ready to say the U.S. is off the hook here altogether.
No, absolutely not. With a slow mover like that, still way out in the central tropical Atlantic, you can't be sure that that is going to miss. And I want to remind everybody what a major hurricane looks like. This is actually out in the Pacific. This is a super typhoon, a Cat 4 equivalent. But this is in the part of the world out in the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent of West Pacific that is the active up part of the world. But the rest of the Pacific and most of the Atlantic, Chris, has been convectively suppressed. So that pattern is kind of stuck, and we don't really know when it's going to start moving or if the Atlantic will just overcome that.
There is a relationship there, though, isn't there? Some part of the world being active, other part of the world not being as active.
Yeah, and a lot of times that activity moves around the world. So different basins around the world go through a couple weeks of activity and then inactivity, and it moves around, but we've been stuck.
And this is more than just a little, wow, that's interesting. This is kind of a big deal how quiet it's been, right?
It really is getting to be significant. And even these systems have their issues. You know, it's not like a slam dunk that these are going to develop and become really, really strong. So now, here we are, the latest starting Augusts in the active era since 1995. We've surpassed all of them except 1997, which is the only year in the active era without an August storm.
But that was a unique year too, right?
Yeah.
You weren't expecting a busy season that year,
no,
right?
Because 1997 was an El Nino year. But the one before that, with 0 storms in August, was 1961. That was a neutral year. It wasn't La Nina or El Nino. Again, El Nino years, warm waters in the Pacific tend to lessen hurricane activity. So that was a neutral year. But all these other years in the past, when we don't have satellites, we don't really know how many storms there were. But the point is, we don't have a known La Nina year like this year with no August storms. So this is somewhat historic.
Right, so it's not just the fact that we've gone a long time, we've gone a long time in a La Nina year, and it's supposed to be a busy year.
Yeah, so, and think of all the data we have to find little tropical storms out there. There has not been one, right? Now, those years, here's 1997, the only year in the satellite era with 0 August storms. This was an El Nino year. But 1961, again, before we had satellites, but we still have a pretty good idea of where the storms were. 1 storm in July. So by this date, we had 1 named storm. You know what we had the second half of the season? 7 more hurricanes and 5 majors. So you can't count out a hurricane season at halftime.
And as mentioned, that's without satellites. You're relying on ships and other things. Not
and
just
landfalls.
Yeah, and landfalls, yeah.
Right. And then we've talked about 2013, which was the most recent year where we expected an above average year, and it didn't happen. And notice, 1 hurricane in the western half of the basin, 1 hurricane in the eastern half, and calm and suppressed in the middle. And that's what this year's kind of behaving like. So we don't know which year this is going to end up being like when the second half story is written.
Right, because that's the other thing. The first half of any given season is not always a predictor of the second half of any given season.
We got 3 long, potentially long months to go. Now, this one is going to be around a while, Chris. This is moving slowly off to the west-northwest. 8 out of 10 shots still from the Hurricane Center. Yes, we have an upper-level low that has been producing some wind shear, bringing some dry air in. But look at how you're starting to get upper-level high-pressure outflow starting to form. And this is the most thunderstorm activity we've seen in the central tropical Atlantic all season long. So this is worth keeping our eye on.
And the fact that you said it's moving slow, there's some time, how does that factor into things?
Well, a couple of things. It gives it more time to develop and strengthen over the warm waters, but it also gives it more time to catch a trough out of town and miss the continental U.S. But it's going toward warmer waters. There's no doubt about that. It's going to head to this part of the basin north of the Caribbean, unlike this eastern Atlantic system that is going to go toward cooler water. So this one doesn't look like it has a long life. But if we look at the models, we've got to pay attention to this guy. Now, this is in the Euro model. You see the colors going slowly northwestward. 5 days from now, it's still at the longitude of Puerto Rico. But then it gets under that ridge. But where is it when the next trough comes in? Does it get a ride out of town or not?
That's the big question.
That is.
But first, we've got to see if we have something in the days to come.
First things first.
A lot to watch here on Storm Center.
Okay, back here. Let's go back here and talk about what we got going on in the tropics. Trying to move to the right spot to get you guys the best coverage that we can. Hey, by the way, last time we had no name storm activity from July 3rd to August 30th was 1941. Yeah, it's been a minute, right? Since 1952, August have had no Atlantic storm formations, 1961 and 1997 to go along with that. So this would be rare company if we don't get a storm. Of course, for the last week, all eyes have been on Invest 91L, right? And we're thinking, gosh, could this be a storm by now? Could it be Danielle? And believe it or not, this little guy has come along into the picture, which could change things. We could actually beat Danielle or get the name Danielle with the northern system before the southern system, and I'll talk about why. If you remember yesterday, we were talking about this front that's kind of dangling here. Sometimes these waves break off from the front. They have a chance to become low-pressure systems or even subtropical storms, and this one certainly has that chance of doing that over the next couple of days. We had a plane out here last night sampling the atmosphere all through this thing, really, and they did not find anything that was significant in terms of a closed low, and they found a very dry atmosphere, quite frankly, around this thing. But look at this. This is not an Invest yet. If it becomes one, it'll be Invest 93L. Remember, we had 92, which was similar to this, where we had a little system break off a front, but this one's actually got some convection all the way around it. It is still maybe part of a front, but it's going to break off and be on its own, and it looks like it's trying to develop in through here, and the European has been very, very bullish on this for the last couple of days. We've still got the twisting going on down and through here, but it's elongated. It's an elongated area of low pressure versus a tight one like we've seen, and that's exactly what the plane found in addition to the dry air. That said, still an 80% chance that this develops. A lot of the guidance starts to develop it more so when it makes the turn somewhere near Puerto Rico. Does that turn continue? Big question mark. Does it work its way to the west? This seems to be the low end of the deal. Most of the guidance, like 99% of the guidance, turns it. Okay, and does not make it an issue for the United States. But I've learned in the past to not trust these things until they turn, especially that close to the United States, Reynolds. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll certainly cross our fingers. Over to you.
There you go, Jim. Thanks so much. A Wednesday morning front lines get you started in the Western Pacific, where you have the strongest storm on the planet at this point. Yeah, so far it is skirting Japan's far south islands today. Now it bears the name Super Typhoon Hinnamnor. Now, it is rapidly intensified. It is powerful with top sustained winds at 160 miles an hour. It will have impacts on Okinawa. That's where 29,000 U.S. troops and their families are stationed.
Hey, we are tracking the tropics out there for you right now, and there are 3 systems we're talking about. First off, this area of low pressure northeast of the Caribbean islands, actually northeast of Bermuda, is showing some signs of organization, and 80% chance that this develops in the days ahead. But it's going to move north and east and not really be a big player in anybody's weather. Area of low pressure moving off of the African coast has a 50% development chance. It could become a short-lived depression, and then it's going to move into an environment more unfavorable for development. So we don't need to worry about that. This is likely turn into the eastern Atlantic. And thirdly, we're still watching this elongated area of lower pressure. A NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft was out there during the day, and they didn't really find any basically great conditions for development, so we continue to keep that chance at about 80%. It's still Invest 91L. Top winds are 35, moving west-northwest very slowly at a speed of only 6 miles an hour. And fortunately, the computer models are still in very good agreement. We expect an upper-level trough to dig on down off the northeastern coast of the U.S., and this will develop a weakness in the high-pressure ridge and kind of dent it a little bit. So the storm will go around this high-pressure ridge, the clockwise flow, and to the east is upper level trough. So the upper level flow and the lower level flow will prevent it from getting anywhere close to the U.S. We'll watch it for you. There's still a lot of dry air to the north and west of both of these lower latitude systems, and that's why it's been such a struggle for them to develop. That's a positive, by the way. We like to see all this dry air. That dry air has been impeding development all season long. Normally, by this time of year, we've had 6 named storms. We've only had 3. By this time of year, we've had 2 hurricanes, we've had 0, and we've had no major hurricanes. So hopefully this trend will continue. The thing is, though, the water temperatures are still above average for much of the main development region in the Atlantic, off the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. And the peak of the hurricane season is now only about 9 days away, occurring next Friday out there. So keep your fingers crossed that we continue to see a very quiet hurricane season.
All right, guys, here you go. Largest gap between named systems, 60. That was yesterday. And by the way, that's probably going to be it, because I think we're going to have a named storm before the end of the day. Here it is, Tropical Depression number 5. This one's here in the northern latitudes, 1,013 millibars, moving east-northeast very slowly. So it has a very good chance of not only becoming a tropical storm, but also a hurricane. Very warm water up here for this time of the year. Very, very warm water. There's the 90 miles an hour by Monday morning. Sunday morning, 85 miles an hour. Saturday PM, 80. So this is going to go fast. And I think it's going to be, it's already a tropical storm, I think. And it certainly has a chance of becoming that, Danielle, before the day is done. I mean, look at that thing wrapping up beautifully, right? Yeah, sure, it's east side loaded. We had quite a bit of shear, actually, yesterday on this. So it pushed all the thunderstorms off to the east. But look at how they've wrapped back in toward the center today. And it will continue to develop, certainly, as we go on in time. Invest 91L, even though it's at 80%, I'm not as confident as that 80% because you got so much doggone dry air around this. We had several missions. We have more scheduled with the low-level invests as we go through time. But we also are going to add something else in the mix, and that is abundant shear coming in from the southwest. And I think that's what the European is seeing. It won't take much to get this to a TS. All right? Sure. Could we have Danielle and Earl? Absolutely. But in terms of what the pitfalls are with 91L, they are large. All right, so you've still got an elongated trough of low pressure with a large wind and stronger wind field on the top side, which would make this a TS. It's no threat to the islands at all. They're going to get some showers and thunderstorms. That's how we get these with these tropical waves as they move on through, thank goodness, or it'd be dry as a bone. But as you look at the entities, there's 94. That's TD5, which is going to be Danielle likely. And this, of course, is 91L working its way to the west. Look at what happens with this in time. All right, especially looking at the European model. Holy, wow, it just kills it. Why? Because of the shear. All right, so all the models certainly confident in at least the depression here out of all of our systems. We know we already got one, so that's like shooting fish in a barrel. But nothing that threatens the United States, not only this weekend, but over the next several days, and that is good news. I want to remind you, we can still get hammered after September 1st, but given the basin right now, and how anemic it looks for tropical systems, you know, if we get to just below average, I think by the time we're done, or even around average, I think it would be pretty amazing. You know, we still remember the season goes to November 30th. Hey, look at this. look at these above normal temperatures that are sitting here over the northern Atlantic. Perhaps something that is helping TD5 become TD Danielle, or Tropical Storm Danielle, a little bit later on today. We'll see.
We have a new named storm. Tropical Storm Danielle has just formed and expected to become a hurricane. Let's get right over to NBC6 meteorologist Adam Berg with what you need to know. Hey, Adam.
Hey there. And yes, statistically speaking, September is our busiest month, right? So right on cue. Things a little bit more active out there. But I'm just going to give you the good news right away. None of these systems that we're tracking 3, none of them impacting land. But let's go ahead and focus on Danielle. You can see that circulation, the bursting thunderstorms right around that center. Certainly a sign of a strengthening system. This became a depression at 5 o'clock this morning, now upgraded to tropical storm per the 11 a.m. advisory. Winds sustained 40 miles per hour. And this thing is barely moving. So thank goodness it's not over land, or we would have a major flood threat on our hands. Look what happens here. Between now and Sunday, it barely moves. But then from Sunday to Tuesday, it makes that move to the north. That's not the only system we're watching. Watching this tropical wave, area of development in that red shaded area. Computer models continue to keep it north of the Leeward Islands, north of Puerto Rico. And even if it were a little farther to the south, this entire area would be on the clean side of this system. So all around, good news. We have a long way to go, obviously. When we come back, I'm going to talk about some scattered storms that are popping up close to home.
Now, yes, we are tracking the tropics. A few disturbances to talk about. The one in yellow, not going to pay attention to that. That's going to fall apart. Of course, you've been seeing this red blob here. We'll talk about that. And now we have the newly formed tropical storm Danielle up in the North Atlantic. First things first, because this is closer to us, and we've been talking about it here. The National Hurricane Center has dropped from 80 to 70%. And good reason for that is still very disorganized here with thunderstorms all over the place, but they're not getting their act together. And some of the models even kind of, indicating that this could fall apart before it turns into anything significant. Even if it did, we still have that nice curve out to sea because of the dip in the jet stream that's going to be coming in just in time here for the weekend. So I think we're looking good as far as that's concerned. And now we have Danielle, right? So here we are, and we put a line all the way. This thing is well into the North Atlantic here. It could, in fact, turn into a hurricane the next couple of days. That's the forecast for it, but it is not moving at all here, and it's just going to churn in place, and then eventually we'll try to get picked up by upper level winds, and that's going to head it out to sea, but it's really not going to do much here. So I think we're looking good. There is no Earl, which would be the next name in the list. That so far we haven't used many names, and we like that. No Earl that I see in the next couple of weeks. 100-degree weather by the afternoon. That's the way it'll feel. We'll have those morning showers followed by afternoon thunderstorms. Labor Day itself, if you're planning it out, I think again for the morning, that's our best bet for showers and storms, and then by the afternoon and evening, we clear things out with coverage at around 30%. We'll leave it at 40% for the holiday weekend, including Labor Day, and that continues along with the heat for next week.
Atlantic Basin with 0 storms in a La Nina year. So that is notable, but La Nina years are notable also for their second halves being very, very busy. So I'm not ready to say that this season's going to be a cakewalk.
But if you said it was twice as busy as August, right?
Yeah, right.
We'd be in good shape.
Right. Well, we've already got Danielle, and this is a notable storm because not only do we have other stuff to watch in the tropics, this is going to be behaving very tropical. In fact, the last 24-hour loop, it formed along a boundary. You had the low-level spin, but the convection keeps increasing. And now today, in the visible imagery, wow, is that coiling up? Look at that last visible shot of the day of something that is intensifying at a pretty good clip, up to 60 miles an hour.
And this is expected to become a hurricane?
Yes, because it's not moving very much, kind of trapped south of a ridge. It is going to be staying over warm water long enough that it will likely strengthen, maybe even to a Category 2 hurricane before finally getting caught up in the westerlies. So if that happens, at least there's one record we're not going to make a run at, which is the latest first hurricane, which historically has happened in the second week of September.
But the impacts with this, the Azores, they're far enough away, maybe some big waves out of the deal?
Yeah, although eventually this could make a run as an extratropical system at Europe late next week.
Okay.
So we can't say no land areas will be affected, but it's the mid-latitude storm systems that'll take it eastward. So this is not a threat to the U.S., but look where it is. At the tail end of the Gulf Stream. So it's got the warm waters just above 80 degrees, even though it's that far north. Sometimes you forget how far north those warm waters go, but especially this year, they're warmer than average.
You see that the Gulf Stream going way up there, helping to transport some of that heat.
Yeah, so that's where, so it's tropical fuel that's making its way up into that zone. But, you know, that can be a zone to get a tropical storm or hurricane in any year. But this year, the waters are way warmer than average up there, and they're warmer than average in the deep tropics. That's why we've still been kind of waiting for the Atlantic Basin to wake up, because there are so many signs pointing to favorable conditions.
But you've been seeing the same thing the past several weeks. They're just getting squashed, right? You're talking about getting stepped on almost?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because there's a lot of stability still in the central Atlantic Basin. All that orange, that sinking air, unlike in the North Atlantic where there's a lot more rising air. And we've got that mid-oceanic trough that is causing this guy some trouble down here. More wind shear that it's going to run into. 91L, the tropical wave is elongated again, so it is struggling. But Chris, when we see this percentage coming down from 80 to 70, we might be thinking, oh, we can let our guard down. This one isn't going to cause us any trouble, but you know how sneaky these systems that don't develop can be.
Because if it develops sooner, it has a better chance of going away, getting caught up in the steering pattern. But a weaker one can kind of sneak underneath, right?
Yes, absolutely. So when this gets into this zone, is it going to be steered or is it going to be sheared and go farther to the west? And we got to watch these systems coming across North America to maybe steer it or shear it. But watch what the Euro does as it goes kind of limping along, runs into some wind shear, so it stays further south and west, and then it finally gets underneath this ridge, and then it starts to get its act together again. So look at what the Euro does late in the game here. I don't like that very much, but the GFS is the opposite. It develops it sooner in the game, and then it turns more quickly.
So a lot to watch. Don't want to tune out this holiday weekend.
And right now, we are keeping tabs on Tropical Storm Danielle.
And that's not the only system out there. Certified meteorologist Luke Doris is here with tonight's update.
Yeah, actually 3 systems out there being monitored by the Hurricane Center. And, you know, we went a long stretch. In fact, it was the second longest stretch on record between named storms, a full 60 days, but only took 1 day into September before we broke that. And Tropical Storm Danielle got going, along with a couple other disturbances that I'll show you here in just a second. So Danielle's the top end tropical storm, winds to 65 miles per hour, probably going to be the first hurricane of the season by tomorrow, even a Cat 2 by this weekend. But it's for the fish. This one is out to sea, so no threat there. All right, so the disturbance, it's way out in the eastern Atlantic, not likely to form now, but we've been tracking this one for several days, and it's the one that's gathered the most attention because, 1, it's likely to form, and 2, it's the one that's closest to land. And it's on the cusp of becoming a depression or storm. It's been battling dry air. It will probably overcome that within the next couple of days. It's looking a little bit more consolidated on satellite. Now, the consensus of the models is that it will stay north of the islands and then recurve back into the ocean. That's most likely to happen. We just want to keep an eye on it to make sure that it doesn't do something like this model is trying to stay and continue on a westward track. Probably won't happen, not too concerning, but we just want to keep tabs on it. Guys?
This is 7 News Today in Florida.
We begin this hour tracking the tropics. Tropical storm Danielle set to strengthen into the first Atlantic hurricane of the season. Meantime, though, here's a live view of the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino on this Friday morning. A nice clear start to our day. Happy Friday, everyone.
Happy Friday is right. Meteorologist Vivian Gonzalez is in the Plex with a look at the tropics. Good morning, Viv.
Good morning, Ethan. In South Florida, we are watching and waiting on a couple areas out there in the tropics. And yes, it's heating up as the peak of the season's around the corner, September 10th. So typically, we definitely see additional activity out there. But here are the 3 areas we're monitoring. We're going to start things off with Danielle. It strengthens some more as of the 5 o'clock advisory. So winds were at 65 miles per hour. Now they're up to 70 miles per hour. So 4 miles per hour shy from becoming the season's first hurricane. It is moving very slowly to the east at around 3 miles per hour, and you can almost tell that there's an eye trying to become exposed, a sign of a strengthening system. It is 800 miles removed to the west from the Azores, and it remains no threat to land. And it's rather impressive that so far up in latitude that this one's actually going to become a hurricane and potentially a Cat 2 system over the weekend. Once it starts to move further up, weakening will happen, but that will take place next week. And then there's this disturbance, area of low pressure, a few hundred miles to the east of the northern Leeward Islands. And this one's becoming better organized, but it's still battling the elements. The Hurricane Center still feels that it has a high chance of up to a 70% in forming into a tropical depression in that area highlighted in red. And most of the models are in agreement that a gap's going to go open up in the atmosphere between high pressure and the jet stream around the eastern seaboard that will keep it over the open waters. Now, as far as the rest of the tropics are concerned, the window for growth on this one by the Cape Verde Islands, well, it's closing since it's already moving into some cooler waters. More on this, your long weekend forecast coming up in a few minutes.
Well,
go ahead, Chris.
Breaking right now, first hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season of 2022.
Yeah, and you know what? This is a hurricane in the far North Atlantic. This is well over 1,000 miles away from the United States and actually at a latitude similar to that of New York.
Yes.
So we're way in the North Atlantic there where the water temperatures are very warm.
As you'll describe, which is unusual. We don't get a lot of originating storms this far north, this early, well, any time of the season, let alone, But the water temperatures in the North Atlantic have actually been much above average compared to where the main development region are, where we would typically expect to see development.
The Atlantic is more friendly and hospitable to tropical development in the northern part than it is in the deep tropics. This is Danielle close up. It looks like it's trying to isolate there a warm spot. In other words, an eye might be trying to develop. And if that indeed does happen with Danielle, you can expect it to strengthen perhaps even more quickly than the forecast suggests. Once you get that eye, that's when the real intensification begins, and we'll be watching that.
Yeah, it did look like it was trying to clear out now. Yeah, with the clouds on the visible satellite. You can see the path, just kind of leaving it around, looping it around through the weekend, and then eventually carrying away north next week.
No threat to the United States, thankfully, which is good news there.
The tropics are really heating up as we enter September. We're now tracking Hurricane Danielle, the first storm of the season. So will any of those systems affect us right here in South Florida?
Fingers crossed. Hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry here now with your tropical update. Michael.
Hey there, Calvin. That's right. Everybody wondering what's going on in the tropics right now with it being so active. Let's start with Danielle. That's the first hurricane that we've seen in the Atlantic going back almost a year to last October. You can see, though, the middle of the North Atlantic, no one to be bothered except for the fishes out here. 75-mile-per-hour winds. This is the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. The only big change here is that this one was originally forecast to be a Category 2 hurricane, now topping out at 85-mile-per-hour Category 1 hurricane, but will stay out to sea, kind of drift around for the next few days and then hang a right turn out over the North Atlantic. Otherwise, across the Atlantic, we're watching two other systems, really just one system here. We have another disturbance off of Africa, not expecting development here. Invest 91L, that's the one we've been tracking all week long. Interestingly, the hurricane hunters have been flying this just to the east of the islands there in the Eastern Caribbean and actually have found modest circulation here, but still it looks like it's ill-defined. And you can see the thunderstorms here are just not congealing or collecting in one central area. So this one is still really struggling with that dry air that we've seen a lot of our systems struggle with this hurricane season. The good news for us with this one, though, as we track it out over into the weekend and then into early next week, it is expected to get picked up by a dip in the jet stream. A stronger system is going to be more likely to turn to the north. A weaker system may continue off to the west. So our friends and neighbors there in the southeastern Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, want to keep an eye to this one in the next few days. But for us in South Florida, not any concern and no threats here from the tropics in the coming days.
We're excited for all of that. But first, I'm here with my friend, First Alert Meteorologist Cat1 because we're tracking a new tropical system that just formed as the first named storm of the hurricane season. Ay, ay, ay.
Also twist over the Atlantic. So we have Danielle. And now we have Earl.
Yeah. I mean, what else, right? Just all over Labor Day weekend.
It's like all of a sudden, it turns
and the lunch
on.
and Friday Night Football. Oh my gosh.
But you know what? Here's the good news. We're not going to be impacted by any of these storms in the tropics over the weekend, or probably not at all by these storms. But it just shows you how fast we can go from a very, very slow season to all of a sudden, here we have activity ramping up. So we have Danielle in the northern Atlantic, about the same latitude as New York City. and we have Earl that's located just to the north of the Leeward Islands. So here's the latest on Tropical Storm Earl moving to the west-northwest at 14. It is going to be steered by a ridge of high pressure and then eventually turn more to the north and eventually to the northeast. So that's a good track for us. If that stays like that, we'll be just fine. Maximum winds with Earl at 40 miles per hour. Here's the spaghetti plots, and you can see most of the models keep it well to the east of the Bahama Island chain and have it curving northward right around the same area as Bermuda, south of Bermuda. Now, Tropical Storm Earl, here is, actually this is going to be Danielle. It says Earl, but Danielle's headed off to the North Atlantic, and it will dissipate over the colder waters.
Tracking the tropics, time is 5:09. We have two systems out there. We have two tropical storms, Tropical Storm Earl in the Atlantic, and we also have Tropical Storm Danielle that just been downgraded to a tropical storm as of the 5 o'clock advisory. Right now, Tropical Storm Earl is actually east of the Leeward Islands. It will track just to the north of those islands and north of Puerto Rico in the next couple of days. It will remain as a category, a tropical storm system for the next couple of days and even next week. And good news, it will be turning to the northeast away from South Florida. Meanwhile, we have Tropical Storm Danielle that will likely become a hurricane again, probably tomorrow into your Monday, and they will track away from the United States to the north.
Well, Molly, tropical activity got off to a late start this year, but better late than never, I suppose, for storm enthusiasts. Not for the rest of us, though, of course. We need to check in with some of the cities here. We've got St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, 85 degrees. Pretty good looking weather out there for now. And I think overall the weather today, even in parts of the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, we're going to be just fine, even though we do have a tropical storm not that far away, right? You might be wondering, wait, tropical storm in the tropical Atlantic? Yeah, we have one, Earl, believe it or not. This formed yesterday, as Molly was saying. Winds are 40 miles per hour, and it is moving slowly toward the west-northwest at about 13 miles per hour. And overall, this system for now looks relatively poised to remain at a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. In other words, I don't think it's going to strengthen very quickly in the near term. The reason why is because the center of circulation is there. You can see it from the satellite pictures right there, with a lot of the thunderstorms well off to the east of where that center of circulation is. That means there's some westerly shear impacting the system. That's not a good thing for the health of tropical cyclones. They don't want too much shear, which is what Earl is fighting right now. The winds are kind of pushing all the thunderstorms off to the east, and that low-level center continues to slide underneath the higher altitude winds toward the west. So the low-level center, guys, is going this way. And the longer it goes that way, the closer it will get to perhaps the Turks and Caicos or some of the parts of the Bahamas. We'll be watching that very carefully. Although this is the most likely outcome, according to the National Hurricane Center, that Earl will continue on the west-northwest path and then move north and then northeast, well away from the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas. It's not entirely locked in there because there are viable scenarios that bring it a little bit farther to the west, and in part because that low-level center is exposed and moving that way. It's not going to be carried by those higher altitude winds. It's going to continue on its merry way toward the west, following the trade wind flow, and that might move things a little bit farther to the west than anticipated. Just to give you a heads up, nothing is set in stone right now, and of course we'll be watching for any changes in the track going forward. But right now we also have Tropical Storm Danielle in the North Atlantic, right? How about that? In farther North Atlantic parts of the region that you never expect tropical development to take place. Of course, it does happen from time to time. There it is. And where's it going? Well, it's not going to come anywhere near the United States. It's going to stay put, very likely for the next couple of days, and then eventually move off into the North Atlantic as a large area of low pressure, perhaps impacting parts of Western Europe in about a week's time. But there's another story, too, that I want to get. We have a tropical storm in the East Pacific. This is Baja California, Baja, Mexico, and then there's parts of Mexico there. And we have to watch out because this system right now is actually bringing some moisture into the southern U.S., but there's more behind it. There is Javier, and there's Invest 93E, right? This system will likely become our next tropical cyclone in the East Pacific. And then the guidance does indeed have it perhaps coming into the southwestern U.S. in about a week's time. Molly, that would bring a lot of flooding rain potential in about a week in the southwest. Of course, lots of uncertainty to unpack, so we'll watch it closely.
We need the moisture. We can do without the flooding. Thank you, Dr. Postel.
¿Qué tal, amigos? Ahora es momento de hablar de las condiciones del tiempo y comenzamos hablando del trópico que se activa a inicios de este mes de septiembre. Danielle, que está muy lejos en aguas abiertas del Atlántico, continúa siendo una tormenta tropical con vientos máximos sostenidos de 70 millas por hora. Se espera, según el Centro Nacional de Huracanes, que para horarios de esta noche vuelva a ser un huracán. Por suerte, nada de lo que preocuparnos en relación a esto, y ya un poco más cerca de nuestra área en el Caribe, de hecho al norte del Caribe de las Antillas Menores, estamos viendo a Earl, que es la última tormenta tropical que se formó. Tiene actualmente vientos máximos sostenidos de 50 millas por hora y es la que pudiera estar trayendo algo de influencia, sobre todo a la isla de Puerto Rico, pues precisamente durante horarios de esta noche y madrugada estaría pasando justo al norte de la isla para después experimentar esa recurva. Allí solamente se estarían esperando copiosas lluvias, pero realmente no existiría ese peligro en relación a los vientos de tormenta tropical.
Tropical storm Earl spinning in the tropics and islands feeling the impact. Meteorologist Brent Cameron is tracking it for us. Brent?
Earl is the main one to watch, even though Danielle just became a hurricane, but in the middle of nowhere in the tropics, up in the north central areas of the Atlantic. So the main focus will be on Tropical Storm Earl, close enough to some of the islands right now north of the Lesser Antilles to make a few island impacts. So here's the new information on Tropical Storm Earl. As of right now, 11 o'clock, we have it moving to the west-northwest at 10 miles per hour. Right now, it's at 50-mile-per-hour strength, so it's not a particularly strong tropical storm as it continues to move just north of the islands. Now, what it is going to do is push some rain bands, and more of them, steady rain bands that could bring up to 6 inches of rain in spots around Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Also hazardous marine conditions and the threat of rising rivers and maybe even some mudslides. Here's the radar coming from Puerto Rico out of San Juan. You see the bulk of the rain now well to the east still. That's the wetter side of the system, but some of those rain bands arriving in Puerto Rico from the north. And here's a quick check on the forecast cone for Earl, a tropical storm that may get a little stronger south of Bermuda, has a chance to become a hurricane. More coming up with your entire forecast.
And we are tracking the tropics. Next weather meteorologist Jennifer Correa is tracking a new area of development there in the Atlantic. Jennifer.
Yes, now I want to talk about the tropics. Inside joke. All right, Hurricane Danielle. Yeah, Danielle was already a hurricane, so let's take it back a little bit of a timeline. But then it downgraded to a tropical storm, and then it upgraded to a hurricane again. It's actually a Category 1 on the lower end of the scale with maximum sustained winds at 75 miles per hour. It's dealing with wind shear. It is just churning away, not really moving much at the moment, but eventually it's going to move out towards the northeast. Now, it does have a center. Obviously, you see it right there, but that eye is pretty ragged. And it's also over the open waters of the central Atlantic, and it will stay away from the Azores. So that's a good thing. Category 1 Hurricane Danielle will remain like that until later on in the week once it starts to downgrade to a tropical storm and eventually a remnant low. This right here is Tropical Storm Earl, and it's actually bringing some unsettled weather for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and also to parts of Puerto Rico. But it veers away from the Caribbean and hopefully stays away from Bermuda.
Let's have a live look at White Bay Beach in the British Virgin Islands. Now, the skies are kind of cloudy, and there's a reason for that. We've got a tropical storm nearby. The waves are kicked up a little bit there. You can see that. Some of the swell coming in, and it looks like off to the east and northeast, the weather is actually pretty nasty out there. We've got a tropical storm Earl. This is one of two named systems now that we've got on the Atlantic side. We've got a Hurricane Danielle in the far North Atlantic, not going to impact the United States. But we have Tropical Storm Earl, which is much closer to home. And we'll talk about where it's going in a second, but I want to get to what it is doing right now. Not moving much. That means it's probably on its way toward changing its path. It was moving toward the west-northwest like that. Now it's almost stalled out, beginning to turn more toward the due north, away from Puerto Rico and away from the British Virgin Islands, which is what we were looking at there, where the weather nearby is not very good, although right now could be worse, although Beef Island right now, how about this? 21 now, gusts to 40 miles per hour in some showers and thunderstorms. That's an island in the British Virgin Islands. And we're also seeing now a west or northwest wind at San Juan, Puerto Rico at only 13. But look at this monstrous area of convection or thunderstorms not that far away with a ton of lightning ongoing. Who said there wasn't any Cape in the tropics? Please, there's tons of it. We've got a lot of instability out there, and the thunderstorms are realizing that. And we can show you the sort of basically the radar from San Juan, giving us the idea that scattered showers and thunderstorms will be in the forecast today in the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and also parts of Puerto Rico. But the main action with Earl is well off to the northeast. I do believe the center of circulation, at least aloft, is up here, exactly where the low-level center is. Not quite clear from that radar shot, but we do think the fact that this system has got more thunderstorms, it's got more thunderstorms very near where that low-level circulation is, that is setting us up for strengthening down the road. Hurricane Center does, in fact, have this as a hurricane inside of 48 hours and then moving in that direction, perhaps becoming a Cat 3 as it moves kind of close to Bermuda, right, by the end of the upcoming week. If you've got interests in Bermuda, pay attention to this one. A strengthening hurricane may be passing a very close by. And the reason why the Hurricane Center's cone looks the way it does is because the models are giving that away. They're telling us the consensus is that it's going to be moving northward very soon and then eventually northeastward on a path roughly like that, well away from the southeast United States. The United States does not look like it's going to be impacted directly by Earl, and that's because now the steering currents are taking hold. The winds aloft are beginning to shove this thing in that direction. Doesn't appear like it's going to make any closer longitude toward the United States. Instead, move only farther away. As will Danielle, hurricane now an 80-mile-per-hour hurricane in the far northern reaches of the North Atlantic, at least in terms of historical tropical initiation points, right? We haven't seen tropical development take place this far north very often in the historical record, but this year, behaving the way this year is behaving, well, it seems to do what it wants to do. So we may have a landfalling tropical cyclone or a remnant thereof in about a week's time in Western Europe. Paul, last graphic, I got to show you this because I know you're interested in this subject here. We have an East Pacific newly formed tropical depression. This tropical depression may indeed become a hurricane and move very close to Mexico during the upcoming week, and then potentially whatever's left of it move into the southwestern United States in about a week's time with a lot of heavy rain potential there. Stay tuned for that. Paul.
Tropics now, and we're almost at the peak of the hurricane season. It looks like it across the Atlantic because it's busy. We have a disturbance coming off of Africa. Not worried about that. Even if it were to form, which it's not expected to, then it would hook out to the north. There's Hurricane Danielle. Not worried about it. It's headed out to open waters, and it's already in open waters. And then we have Tropical Storm Earl that's down here. That is north of the Leeward Islands. Now, some fringe effects being felt through Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and Anguilla and spots like that. But the worst of the weather is way up over here. In fact, that's where the tropical storm force winds lifting to the north. Not a threat to the Turks and Caicos or the Bahamas or the U.S., though this is looking to morph into a powerful hurricane by the end of the week. Cat 3 with 120-mile-per-hour forecast winds by Friday. That spot right there, though, that's Bermuda. They're going to want to keep an eye on it. So out of all of the contiguous United States, the state that has the most likely odds to see any impact at all from a tropical storm is actually California. Look at this. This is weird. So here's Tropical Storm K that formed today. You can see where it's going to track, and it's not going to make a hit. Don't want to make it sound like that, but look at it spray possibly some moisture by next weekend over Southern California, which is good. They could use it. They're in a bad drought, but just odd in what has been an odd season.
NBC6 First Alert Weather, certified most accurate 9 years in a row.
I'm meteorologist Chelsea Ambries, and temperatures today are back into the low 90s. We do have scattered showers and heavy rain that's starting to pick up in far western parts of Broward and Miami-Dade County. Otherwise, excuse me, it's going to feel like we're well into the triple digits, and the beach is going to be the place to be. Widely scattered storms are working from east to west. We're seeing some of them down into the Keys and, as I mentioned, into western parts of both Broward and Miami-Dade. We are watching the tropics as well. Tropical Storm Earl is still moving away from Puerto Rico, away from the Virgin Islands, but we do still have some heavy rain impacting both the British and U.S. Virgin Islands. That system is likely to scoot just to the east of Bermuda. Bermuda is in that forecast cone, so if this system pulls farther to the west, it could bring some major impacts to the island itself. That's not the only area of interest. We are also watching down off the coast of Africa, another general cluster of thunderstorms that has about a 40% chance of development over the next 5 days. Hurricane Danielle way up into the open waters, and that one's not impacting any life, land, or property.
This is Danielle out here. This isn't going to bother us at all. The latest 80-mile-per-hour winds, it will continue to weaken and then become extratropical and be a big old extratropical cyclone way up in the North Atlantic. This is Earl, still struggling a little bit with some shear here, but it did increase to 70 miles per hour on the verge of becoming a hurricane, and it is forecast to become a hurricane tomorrow. Then the shear relaxes, and this bumps up to a Cat 2, then a Cat 3, but by that time it's racing up into the northeast. We'll have to see if it gets caught up in here. We have another little mid-Atlantic low, that nor'easter type, that will move off, and they may start to dance out there or interact in some way, so we'll have to see about that. But it's still moving away. It's not coming back towards us or anything. This one, up to a 60% chance. We'll keep an eye on it. It's way out there. This is the time of year where we're going to see a bunch of storms start to form now. It's been rather slow. Low to mid-90s for highs, 70s for lows, increasing rain chances as we get into the weekend.
Well, we are just days away from the peak of hurricane season, and right now you see it there. We do have 2 named storms out in the Atlantic and now a 4th area that our team is watching. So let's get over to NBC6 meteorologist Adam Berg breaking down the details for us. Hey, Adam.
Hey there, and right on cue, statistically speaking, we are right around the peak of hurricane season. You get another little mini peak in October, so we still have a ways to go. A lot of people are always surprised when they hear that the hurricane season, there's a little bit of a lag with this, right? So hey, let's get right to business. We're going to start with Hurricane Danielle. This is St. John's, Newfoundland. This system sits about 800 miles to the west of the Azores. This is in the middle of nowhere, which is great news, right? 75-mile-per-hour hurricane per the 11 a.m. advisory, moving east-northeast at 6 miles per hour. This system's actually going to do a loop-de-loop here, and then hopefully we are writing the final advisory on Danielle by the end of the weekend. So along with those 2 other systems in the far eastern Atlantic, we are also tracking Tropical Storm Earl. Now, this system sits here just under 400 miles to the north of Puerto Rico and the U.S. and the British Virgin Islands, and about 600 to 700 miles or so south of Bermuda. So again, not impacting land. Now, this is a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm. It is forecast to intensify, and I'm going to pause as we get very close to Bermuda here. We could be talking about a Category 3 relatively close to Bermuda, so we could be getting some tropical storm conditions here, and then this system will continue to weaken, hopefully a depression by the weekend. This would be our first major hurricane of the season. Thankfully, like the other systems here, no real impact to land. 7-day forecast. It's hot out there. Coming up next.
We fast forward into Thursday, Friday, that's when we really begin to see those changes from that high breaking down. We'll have an area of low pressure developing in the northeastern portions of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's going to make our wind pattern veer a little more out of the southwest, which means we'll see the return of those afternoon thunderstorms both Thursday and could linger into the upcoming weekend. While our weather turns active here by the end of the week, we're also keeping a close eye on an active tropics. Right now in the Atlantic, we find Tropical Storm Earl, which hasn't changed much in intensity today. It's been trying to get its act together, but battling strong upper level winds, that wind shear kind of not letting it intensify anymore with winds of 65 miles per hour. This is as of 11 a.m. today, still moving towards the north at 5 miles per hour. As high pressure begins to weaken, it's going to ride along that western periphery of that high, eventually another system pushing it out to sea. And as it passes to the southeast of Bermuda, we could be dealing with a major hurricane here as it continues to move away. The system will be large enough that maybe some impacts will be felt, so interest in Bermuda should definitely monitor the progress of Earl, eventually moving into the northern Atlantic.
We also find Hurricane Danielle continuing to meander over the north central Atlantic. Right now it's moving towards the east-northeast at 6 miles per hour at 75 miles per hour maximum sustained winds. Eventually it's expected to loop and merge with a larger area of low pressure as we work our way into the upcoming weekend. Neither system poses any threat to the U.S. or to South Florida.
It's a live look here at Mexico's west coast. It looks a little bit brighter right now. Maybe a little consolation when the surf looks like this and the pool is empty here at this resort. Weather not great. This thanks to, in part, Hurricane K. It's been kicking up some very rough surf and sending up some clouds and some showers here to Cabo. And joining us now, hurricane expert, former director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Rick Knabb, looking at this Hurricane K. And Dr. Knabb, this could have some impacts to the United States, something we haven't said a lot about the Atlantic basin lately.
Yeah, this is going to bring at least some moisture to Southern California and a lot of other parts of the West, maybe more than that, maybe some winds. And we're going to have a lot of land between now and then on the Baja California Peninsula be impacted. I mean, September and October, Cabo San Lucas has had a lot of tropical storm and hurricane impacts. This is a tropical storm warning situation as this moves northwestward. But look at this path over the next 5 days. It's going to bend a little bit back to the right. And look how far north nearly a hurricane goes up the west coast of Baja California. This is an unusual track for something that strong this close to that peninsula.
Yeah, it's still a strong tropical storm all the way up here, Dr. Knabb, possibly, if it goes up on this route.
Yeah, so that's because it still has more strengthening to do over the warm waters before it hits the cooler waters, and it'll be moving at a pretty good pace. And when a large, maybe major hurricane...
Yeah, close to Cat 3, possibly.
Yeah, so when it's that strong, it's not going to just go away so quickly, and it will have a couple days before it really spins down. So this is on its way up. Cabo San Lucas weather is on the way down, and then it hits the cooler waters. You can see these pancakey clouds here west of the peninsula. That's an indication of where the cooler waters are, and they get much cooler very quickly into the 70s, even upper 60s off the Southern California coast. But those waters are warmer than average for this time of year, so it will take a little bit longer to spin down than usual.
It's not coming to a halt necessarily, more of a slower grind down.
Yeah, and there's the big ridge out west, which is going to block it from getting too far north, but we do have troughing that will kind of suck the moisture up into much of the western U.S. So watch how this plays out. The white lines are the middle and upper level pattern, the colors, the low level spin, and this is the GFS. Look how close it gets to Southern California. I mean, we've had tropical storms go into California before, but it's a rare occurrence, and it's been more than 25 years since that happened. Breaking right now here on the Weather Channel, we went the first entire half of the hurricane season with no hurricanes, and now we've got a twofer. We got both Danielle and now just declared Hurricane Earl. We anticipated that based on what we saw in the satellite and the recon data. But it has not only gone across the threshold, it's gone over it by a bit. Now the max winds are up from 70 to 80 miles an hour. Pressure come down to 985. A NOAA Hurricane Hunter plane has been in the system to verify this, but the satellite are pretty indicative of the strengthening as well. Look at those really cold cloud tops, not as sheared as it was, certainly, and the outflow is becoming much, much better defined, and it's headed toward even warmer water than it's been over. And that water is warmer than average south of Bermuda, near and north of Bermuda especially. So there's a lot more fuel ahead for this hurricane now to take advantage. Look at these last few visible images of the day, those overshooting tops. This is the formative eye wall. It's building its inner core. And here's what the recon showed. Look at that flight that was going from southeast to northwest. They got surface winds and flight level winds to confirm that this had become a hurricane. And this was anticipated, but what's also anticipated is this becomes a major hurricane. We got tropical storm watches up for Bermuda. This is what the peak of the hurricane season looked like. Updates as the evening goes on here on the Weather Channel.
At first at 11, we're taking a look at our first warning weather satellite loop showing where Earl has now become the second hurricane of the season. Good evening. I'm Todd McDermott.
And I'm Felicia Rodriguez. Thank you for joining us. Our severe weather expert Mike Lyons has more on Earl,
Hurricane Danielle, and 2 other systems out there we're watching. And I think we can smile about this because none of them are going to affect us, right, Mike?
Lots of activity. Thankfully, no threats to South Florida, no threats to the United States. Let's begin with Earl. As you point out, it was upgraded at 8 o'clock tonight by the National Hurricane Center. You can see the storm. It's large. It's basically due east of Florida. It's not going to get anywhere near us tonight. Here's the 11 o'clock advisory just in from the National Hurricane Center. Right now up to 80 miles per hour. This storm is forecast to continue to intensify. You can see where it started on Friday when it was upgraded to a tropical storm. Over the weekend, it brought some rain to Puerto Rico. Now it's moving due north, and that northerly track with a little turn to the northeast will continue as this storm heads to the open waters of the North Atlantic. It's going to miss every piece of land with one exception, the island of Bermuda. Right there, it'll come close, and that island is under a tropical storm watch tonight. Again, this could become a major hurricane in the next couple of days. The other hurricane, it's Danielle. By the way, the last time we had multiple simultaneous hurricanes in the Atlantic was 2 years ago, September of 2020. And tonight, Danielle, as you can see, again, headed for about the same spot as Earl, maybe arriving a day or 2 earlier. Meanwhile, 2 other systems we're watching, 2 other areas of interest. X here marks the spot. This is a system that has about a 60% chance of formation. It's headed for the open waters of the Atlantic. And the other system here, about ready to move off the coast of Africa, maybe a 20% chance of development. Again, both of those storms way out there and most likely will stay in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So again, it's September. We expect a lot of activity, but so far, so good. All the storms out to sea. Meanwhile, back here at home, very hot, very dry. We'll talk about that trend and that pattern when I'm back with my full forecast in a couple minutes.
Good morning, Ethan. Alex, South Florida is getting a little crowded in the tropics. Yes, we are watching for areas out of the 4 tracking 2. And we're going to start things off with Earl. It's a hurricane with 80-mile-per-hour winds, and this one's just located over 400 miles south of Bermuda. It is moving toward the north very slowly, and over the next couple of days it's likely to become a major hurricane. There was a hurricane hunter mission out there to gather more information on Earl, and now it's just leaving back toward St. Croix. Now your forecast track calls for this one to become a major storm coming very close to Bermuda between Thursday and Friday morning with 120-mile-per-hour winds. And now there's a tropical storm warning in effect for Bermuda. The latest on Danielle, 80-mile-per-hour winds. It's actually strengthened a little bit over some cooler conditions, but it is expected to gradually weaken, just transition into an extratropical system, producing very strong winds. But the best news of all is that this one's not going to impact any land areas. We also have this broad area of low pressure trying to get its act together just to the west of the Cape Verde Islands. It has a medium potential in developing. And then there's also a wave that we're following that's still over the coast of Africa. So here's the latest on our local weather. Just seeing a couple pop-up showers to our east of Miami-Dade around Biscayne Bay and surrounding the lower Florida Keys near Big Pine Key. More on your local weather coming up in a few minutes.
Caught on camera, a tornado sweeping through a trailer park community in Central Florida. This is in Bradenton, Florida. You're just south of Tampa, where this spin-up sent debris flying across the neighborhood.
The chaos was captured on dash cam from a Manatee County EMS ambulance on Friday. Fortunately, no injuries were reported, but man, those storms still aren't done with the Sunshine State. Always worried about this kind of thing in the summer.
You said it. Absolutely, indeed. Wow. Well, welcome back here at America's Morning headquarters here on this Wednesday, mid part of our week, but not the mid part of the hurricane season.
Yeah.
We still have a little bit more than, I'd say, what, 60, 70%?
I think we're in the 70% range. So yes, things are really now just starting to ramp up a little bit late, but they're busy and we've got circles all over the map. So let's get right to Dr. Greg Postel, one in the Pacific, which is incredibly interesting. And then what we're watching in the Atlantic, Greg, also has their own different facets of, potential interest and impacts.
You mentioned it's been a really odd hurricane season before. You guys are exactly right about that. I mean, we had this incredible gap between named storms beginning July 4th weekend to late August. And now we're starting to see things happen in places that you typically don't normally see.
Like the North Atlantic.
The North Atlantic. We had Hurricane Danielle form at a place so far north it rarely happens in history. Yeah. Let's have a look at the map and show you all the circles out there, not just in the Atlantic, but of course the Pacific. As Jen was mentioning, exactly right. Hurricane K is going to be not making landfall in Mexico or California, we don't think, but certainly bringing the chances for rain and clouds into the region, which not only makes it cooler, but also brings rain to drought-stricken areas in the Southwest over the next couple of days. But the couple of hurricanes in the Eastern Atlantic, there's Danielle. Look at how far north it is right now. It's like the latitude of Bangor, Maine right now as a hurricane in the North Atlantic, where we're seeing record warm water temperatures up here. Part of the reason why we're able to sustain a tropical cyclone of that intensity that far north. So yeah, we've got that. And then we've got Hurricane Earl. You might think, that seems a little closer to the United States, right? Is it going to be a threat to the East Coast? No, it will not be, but it might make a close encounter with Bermuda over the next couple of days as a strengthening hurricane. Right now, Cat1, 85 miles per hour, or thereabouts, based on the hurricane reconnaissance missions that were flying in there this morning. But look how close, ultimately, Earl comes to Bermuda. And this is going forward hour by hour, showing you that by, let's say, late Thursday and early Friday, we may be dealing with a close enough encounter to Bermuda to bring some tropical storm force winds on the western side of the circulation. So nothing we can't handle, of course, in Bermuda, but still kind of a windy and rainy time of it, perhaps, for a couple of hours late Thursday and early Friday before it scoots on out to sea. That would be Earl moving along a path roughly like that. But notice the intensity. Wow. A Cat 4 maybe over the Atlantic. That's the expected intensity, right? This is a pretty strong system as it moves in that direction. Let's talk about real quick where Danielle and Earl and perhaps the next one go over the next week. This takes us out 1 week and shows you that really everything out there stays out there, and we're going to continue to have to wait to perhaps more stuff coming off of Africa to make it a little bit farther to the west, closer to the Caribbean islands, maybe even the U.S. down the line. We'll see. Alex and Jen.
To get that air to cool down for us here, and it may take a hurricane in Southern California. There's a look at Hurricane K. Now, I'm not saying that you're getting a landfalling hurricane in California. It's not what I'm saying at all. But you're going to feel some effects from it, we believe. Well-formed hurricane at this point, Category 2. You can see the eye right there, Cabo San Lucas here. And Baja California, we believe it's going to skim right along the coastline here. 105-mile-per-hour winds, north-northwest movement here at about 12 miles per hour. There's been a little bit of erosion of thunderstorm activity on the western edge of that, but I think overall the effects are going to be the same for you in Southern California. We have tropical storm warnings, hurricane watches, hurricane warnings in effect, and tropical storm watches go all the way up to the U.S. Mexico border, and Dr. Nab was just telling us they could extend tropical storm watches into Southern California if they believe that the wind criteria will affect places like, say, San Diego. But there's a look at the forecast track, and you can see paralleling the coastline, or maybe even if it stays on the eastern track of that, hitting the Mexican coastline here and then spinning back to the west, weakening along the way as it now encounters some really cooler sea surface temperatures that may bring down the intensity of this. Overall, though, here's the concern. This is the big one to watch for. How much moisture comes with K? Again, the center may spin away from Southern California, but the moisture comes right up the gut here, including places like Palm Springs, Palm Desert, San Diego. Heads up on what's coming our way here. This could be highly impactful with, in some places, as much as 4 inches of rain anticipated. For some places, that's 6 months worth of rain, and maybe a day or two flash flooding will end up being the result of that. There's us tracking K through tomorrow, and look at that moisture just really pulling in here from the Pacific. Concerned about places in and around Joshua Tree. Remember, we've had 2 national parks devastated by flooding so far this year. Could it be a third, Alex, with that kind of forecast Friday into Saturday in particular?
We are tracking all the action in the Atlantic. A look at that. 4 areas highlighted on your screen. 2 of them have names.
Busy as meteorologist Erica Delgado is live in the Weather Center with the details. Erica.
Joe, and yesterday at this time, both of those named storms, one was a tropical storm and the other was a hurricane. But as of yesterday evening, both of them became hurricanes. We have Hurricane Earl and Hurricane Danielle. And now one of the areas that we're watching for development has a high chance and could become a tropical depression as early as tomorrow. Let's start with Hurricane Earl because it's closest to South Florida, about a little less than 900 miles to the east-northeast of our local area, and it's a strengthening system with winds of 85 miles per hour. The wind shear it's been battling now beginning to die off some, so we'll see the system continue to strengthen as it moves towards the north. Right now being tracked out of Bermuda, about 400 miles to the south of it. And you can see it's going to come awfully close to Bermuda, even though it is expected to remain to the southeast of it. The tropical storm force conditions will extend out about 140 miles from the center. So tropical storm conditions are expected in Bermuda, and that's why a tropical storm warning does remain in effect there. Here's a zoomed out look at the cone. This system could become a Category 4 as early as Friday and then continue into the northern Atlantic. Meanwhile, we have Hurricane Danielle continues to meander over the north central Atlantic with winds of 80 miles per hour. This system is expected to loop around, eventually merge with another area of low pressure, and then could begin to impact areas of Portugal as we head into next week. Those are the 2 named systems that we're watching right now. I'll have more in the tropics coming up in just a few minutes.
Let's talk about what's happening with Kay. A lot to talk about actually in the tropics since we start off with this one because, again, believe it or not, here we are in September, and the most impactful tropical system thus far in either basin is going to be Kay. All right, in terms of the United States mainland. And why? We're talking about rain. We're bringing a bring rain event. The good news is at least this thing didn't bomb out as a major hurricane, which was forecast to do yesterday. Still, that said, we've already got impacts for central Baja. The moisture's already feeding north. You can see it here. You can feel it in San Diego. We got a 72 dew point there this morning. Yuma has a 70 dew point, so that's extremely moist. Sure, when the monsoon's cranking, you can get there. I saw a dew point this summer of 79 in Yuma, but this is obviously the presence of a tropical system that's bringing warm, moist air north through the Gulf of California. By the way, only 3 times at Petco have we had a rain out, but they just happen to be hosting the Dodgers this weekend, so we'll see. Do we get another one tomorrow? It's certainly possible with the wet weather moving on through. It just depends on how all this shakes out. Flood watches are mainly over the interior. All right. It looks like, when you think about it, there'll be some downsloping to the coast. But I want to caution everybody. I mean, each one of these events is like new territory. We just haven't had enough of them to say, okay, with a storm going here, this is what happens. With a storm going in that position or at this strength, that's what happens. We just can't do that. So we have to treat each one of these differently. So the flood potential is high over a couple of days in Southern California, no matter where you are, whether you're in the mountains or the seacoast or over the inland deserts. So keep that in mind. Hurricane Earl, Invest 95L, which, by the way, is probably already a TD. It's just getting sheared this morning. Hurricane hunters are in there. They just found a 966 millibar pressure. So the pressure's dropping in through here. But what's interesting is the path that they took, and I'll show you that in just a second. Now, right now, hurricane watches are up for Bermuda, along with the tropical storm warnings. You can see the center right down here. It's actually coming in to range, the 500-kilometer range of the Bermuda radar. Some of these bands, which are pushing the moisture onto the north. But here's the plane. The plane's gone west, so they're looking for the wind field. How big is the wind? How big is the tropical storm and hurricane wind field with this? Do we need to, at some point, especially with more of a northerly and westerly movement with this, at least at the moment, bring these hurricane watches up to hurricane warnings? And that's kind of what's going on right now. Either way, this thing is developing. It is moving north. All the guidance takes it east of Bermuda, but is it going to be far enough east to get us out? No shear today here. 95L is being sheared, but you can see the exposed center with that as it continues to push toward the northeast. Earl, looking pretty good this morning.
That is my first shot of seeing that on Viz. That is very
good looking hurricane.
Temperatures are dropping down a couple of degrees, winds starting to pick up. But Dr. Nab, we just had landfall.
Yeah, so it is going to spend a little bit of time centered over land, then go back over the relatively cool water. So it may landfall here as a hurricane on the west central coast of Baja California Peninsula. You don't get hurricanes this far north on this side of the peninsula very often. And I still want to point your attention to that pressure. A Cat1 with 982 millibars, that's a pretty low pressure, and that pressure gradient is getting spread out over a large distance. This is a large and slow-moving hurricane it will be, and it'll go down to like half of its forward speed when it gets up in here. So the fact that it's going to slow down and be large is why it's going to have such an impact in Southern California.
Yeah, you like to say category slow.
Category slow. Hate these ones.
From the past. You do. The good news, though, it's moving up towards cooler water. It has some interaction or a little friction, at least on the east side with land. So that means more weakening can be expected. But we still have some significant impacts, and terrain is going to be a big player on what some of those impacts are and where they're going to be.
Yeah, so don't be fooled by the fact that there's no tropical storm warnings north into California. That doesn't mean there aren't any watches and warnings and there aren't going to be any impacts. And again, these impacts will be well outside the cone. First and foremost, this high wind watch, which includes Metro San Diego up into the Inland Empire. Yes, the strongest gust might be up in the mountains, 55, 60 miles an hour, but you could gust 30, 40, 50, 55 miles an hour all the way to the coast.
Yeah, so that can cause damage, that can cause power outages. Let me ask you, is this kind of a hint with a high wind watch, meaning that this is the type of alert we're going to get as opposed to, say, a tropical alert?
Yes. And you know, the sustained winds are what drive a tropical storm warning. And the sustained winds probably won't get more than, say, 30, 35 miles an hour. A tropical storm would have 39 mile an hour or greater, and not at the coast. But the terrain is going to create the gusts. You know, the gusts above sustained wind are a lot greater over terrain than they are, say, over the open ocean.
Right.
So you can have sustained winds below tropical storm force, but gusts way above that. And then we got the flash flood watch, and it goes into portions of Metro San Diego. And that's going to be another big hazard. Again, because of the large size and the slow motion, the rainfall totals could add up.
And it's really concerning in a place, I was thinking about Palm Springs, for example, where their rainfall for the month is like 1/4 of an inch. And they could be talking about a couple of inches of rain potentially.
Yeah, and it doesn't take nearly that much in that kind of desert terrain, because the water's just going to run off right away. It's not going to soak in because it's so dry. And again, to give you an idea of the size of the system and the effects of terrain, this community, Guaymas, is 200 miles away from the center, and they're gusting over 50 miles an hour.
Wow.
So that's the kind of thing that's coming into Southern California. Even though your winds aren't too bad today, they will be increasing. So you're not quite into the winds yet, but the winds directions are out of the east, so we're still getting the downslope heat all the way to LA and San Diego.
All right, so those winds already starting to pick up. When is the peak of that, you think, going to happen? The worst
That's going to be tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow's going to be the biggest day for the wind, and then Friday night, Saturday morning will be the biggest time for the rainfall and the flood risk.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Knapp. Chris?
First, an update on Hurricane Earl. I'm thankful that the winds are down to 100 and not up to 111, which is what we expected. Now, they'll still get above 111, and this will become a major hurricane, the first of the season. But as it's passing Bermuda, obviously, the lower this number, the better for Bermuda, because they will have tropical storm conditions. The storm right now is about 125 miles from the island. Certainly looks like a classic hurricane now. You can see the eye developing, and right there is Bermuda. They're getting the tropical storm winds pushing in right now, but the eye itself should just miss them by a couple of 100 miles, and that is good news. And also remember that the worst weather is on the right side of forward motion, which is basically that side. And Bermuda is on the left side of forward motion, which is less active. So that is good news, but this is still a powerful storm. It's going to pass by with winds of 110 miles per hour. There is a hurricane watch. I don't think the hurricane winds will make it into Bermuda, but tropical storm winds already pushing in as we speak. And this system is going to be around for the next 5 to 7 days. Even if it's not tropical by the time we get to the weekend, it could still have hurricane or tropical storm force winds. But I want to show you at 6 o'clock, so over the next hour, that yellow circle right there, those are the winds of 39 plus tropical storm winds pushing in. And that right there, around midnight tonight, our time, the worst weather, the destructive winds right there, that's the orange color, getting awfully close. So there's going to be some rough weather tonight, but the hurricane winds, we hope those stay far away. And by tomorrow morning, even the tropical storm winds are completely out of the area.
The big story we are still following here on Storm Center is Hurricane K. Now, it won't be a hurricane for too much longer, but don't let that fool you into thinking it isn't going to have impacts farther north than where it is now, including in Southern California, because it is going to weaken but not go away. And this is a large hurricane. You're starting to see the cloudiness and occasional showers and strong easterly winds in Southern California. And so the impacts of this large hurricane will be felt well outside the cone. It'll stay a tropical storm into tomorrow night, even into Saturday morning. And you'll be on that strong northeasterly side. And then you add in the influence of terrain enhancement. So we got high wind warnings from San Diego up into the Inland Empire, power outages, down trees, problems on the roads with high-profile vehicles, and then the problems on the roads will get worse when that flooding risk ramps up tomorrow night into Saturday. And then we've got Hurricane Earl, which is a Cat 2, max winds of 100 miles an hour. The center will go east of Bermuda, but this is going to bring at least tropical storm conditions to that island where the winds are on the increase as the core moves off just to the east there. Hurricane watch and tropical storm warning in effect for Bermuda. So that is certainly one of the trouble spots that we are looking at for tomorrow. But Chris, one thing I'll remind everybody of is this is already sending swells to the East Coast, rip current danger all the way through the weekend.
It's hurricane season ramping up. We are heading into the peak season.
Let's get right over to Chief Meteorologist Vitas Reed. He's tracking the tropics tonight. Vitas.
Yeah, we go from nothing to a lot all at once, kind of out there in the Atlantic. But none of this activity, all of this that you see behind me is not affecting the United States, which is good news. So let's take a look at some of this activity. We have this area in the central portion of the Atlantic, 60% chance for formation over the next 2 days and next 5 days. No threat to the United States. Looks like that's going to continue to kind of turn its way out into the Atlantic. Off the west coast of Africa, about a 30% chance over the next 5 days. No threat as we see this kind of making its way out into the central Atlantic. What we do have is a pretty strong hurricane affecting folks in Bermuda. Earl, that thing is spinning around and it's affecting them right now with a very strong eye. As you see the island of Bermuda right here. This is a Category 2 storm expected to strengthen to Cat 3. So now it just went down to 1, just updated here. So Category 1 storm, and that it looks like it's going to be back to 2 as we get into Friday early morning. Then we're looking at a Category 3, and then it'll become a low as we go into the next few days heading into this upcoming weekend. As far as the spaghetti model is pretty much in agreement, as well as the track of this storm not affecting the United States. As we go from Earl up to Danielle, that storm is opening up and not really going to affect anyone. Extratropical cyclone. What we're looking at, peak hurricane season, we're going to continue to see that activity out there. Continue to be busy, but we'll keep our eyes to the ocean to see if anything would affect us. I'll have more on your weekend forecast coming up.
All right, Hurricane Earl is now pulling away from Bermuda, where a tropical storm warning is still in effect. Meanwhile, impacts will also be felt along the east coast of the U.S., and we're talking about rip currents. That could be a big problem as we head into this weekend. And I know that it's still plenty warm outside. Maybe you have some beach plans. Just be really careful. We'll get to that rip current threat in just a minute. But look at Hurricane Earl. There's Bermuda right there. So it is pulling away from Bermuda now, but still causing some very rough surf, some high swells, and some strong winds and some rain on the island of Bermuda. Now, keep in mind, Bermuda is a very, very small island. It's hard to get a direct hit on Bermuda. And this one, of course, is just skirting right past the island, but still causing some big impacts. You can see by Bermuda's radar, this is actually the radar from the island of Bermuda, where you've got menacing Earl that is just off to the east. It's continuing to swirl away. So that's good news. Those impacts will be less and less in, say, the next 24 to 36 hours. But it looks pretty fierce when you look at it on satellite, especially water vapor, and you can just kind of see all of the moisture and the swirls and the higher winds that will be continuing to move off to the north and to the northeast, eventually bringing this into the northern open Atlantic. Then really the only thing that it can affect there is maybe some of the shipping channels. We have a lot of activity in the Atlantic right now, but nothing that looks to threaten the lower 48, at least for now. We are getting closer to the peak of Atlantic hurricane season, which is September 10th. So we're just a few days away now. Actually, I think we're just 1 day away. Tropical Storm K, this is going to be a big concern for Southern California, parts of the desert Southwest, even as far north as Las Vegas could be seeing some tremendous moisture from Tropical Storm K. Despite the fact that this is going to curve away from California, it is going to weaken as well. But in the meantime, it's going to push a lot of rich tropical moisture in the direction of Southern California and even up towards Arizona, Southern Nevada. This is going to be, you can kind of see it right now. This is water vapor showing all the moisture that's right now starting to surge into parts of Southern California. The rain is not quite there yet, but it is on the way. And the concerns are so high that there's actually a flood watch out for areas of Southern California stretching over into Arizona, Las Vegas included in that. And places like San Diego, so far this year, you've only had 2.5 inches of rain. And Jordan, we could pick up anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of rain in just the next couple of days.
Hurricane Earl continues to churn in the Atlantic. Here you got some of the rough surf in Bermuda. Few vantage points. Also, just how dark the skies are, right? You go to Bermuda, you're like, oh, sunglasses and sunscreen. That's all I need. This week, a little bit more cloud cover, at least for a time being. It's moving away now, so the worst of it is done for Bermuda, and this storm is quickly continuing off to the north and east. We'll look at Earl in a moment, but let's start again with Kay. We give you a live look at Palm Springs, California, where you can't see anything. You usually can see everything. We've got rain coming down, the low cloud cover, gusty winds as well, although not too much there. Those trees not whipping around like crazy, but we do have winds exceeding 50, 60 miles an hour in other parts of Southern California, and that'll continue to be a danger here over the next few hours. The rain, though, that's going to be the main threat out of Kay. Now a tropical storm with winds at 45 miles an hour. This is moving off to the north and west, so this is going to move off to the northwest, wrap back around. That cooler water will continue that weakening trend, but the tropical moisture already in place is the problem. So the flash flooding danger, that's what we're watching for here in the next several hours, really all the way into the start of the weekend. So through tomorrow, watching for those issues. And we've got the flash flood warnings now adding up along Interstate 8 here in Southern California. Imperial County under a flash flood warning until 3:30. Considerable threat tag on this. So there have been some reports of boulders over roadways. So flash flooding issues are already happening, and they're likely to continue. That very heavy rain continues to work into some of these areas and also communities farther to the north and west. So flash flooding will be a dangerous thing this afternoon, overnight, and into tomorrow. If you have to travel, make sure you're being cognizant of the threats and watching for water-covered roadways. Never drive over those. Imperial County here also to the west of El Centro. You're under the flash flood warning. We've got considerable threat tag on this as well. Again, we look at what's happening here in the Atlantic. We've got Hurricane Earl, good-looking storm right now, again, moving away from Bermuda. We've got Invest 95L, low chance of development in the next 5 days, and then some areas to watch. These waves coming off of Africa, low chances over the next 5 days for development. So it's been a tough go for those waves off of Africa this year. Right now, Hurricane Earl, a Category 2 storm, 100-mile-per-hour winds. You can see this is moving very quickly, 22 miles an hour now to the north and east. So beginning to move away from Bermuda, and we will see weakening as this moves off into those cooler waters. It has been bringing some rough surf into parts of North Carolina, so avoiding some of these beaches. That's what first responders are saying. Hey, you don't want to be out there. It's a little rough this weekend, and we'll be watching this storm continue off to the north and east, so out over portions of Atlantic Canada. They'll be looking at some of the effects as well in terms of winds. They're dying down, but still gusty winds could kick up the waves. By Sunday evening, you can see we've got 50-mile-per-hour winds out of Earl, then continuing off to the east as we head into the mid part of next week. In terms of Hurricane Earl in Bermuda, you can see the worst of the wind now moving away from the island, so better weather ahead. Mike?
NBC6 First Alert Weather, certified most accurate 9 years in a row.
In all of our newscasts this afternoon, we've been highlighting the landfall of Hurricane Irma, which happened 5 years ago overnight tonight. And it had made 7 landfalls before reaching South Florida, or altogether it had 7 landfalls. And when it reached here, it was a Category 4, but it had been a Cat 5 for quite some time. And some of the islands in the northeastern Caribbean were just obliterated by Hurricane Irma. And of course, also for Puerto Rico, it was the precursor to Hurricane Maria, because that year, 2017, was just a terrible year in the Atlantic. I mean, Harvey, Maria, Nate, those names were retired along with Hurricane Irma, too. Now, today in the Atlantic, not a lot going on. We do have Earl in the North Atlantic. It hasn't impacted directly anyone. We have very nondescript, pretty mediocre systems otherwise, with 20% or less chance of development. There goes Earl. It's expected to die off in the waters of the North Atlantic, even though right now it still has winds of 105 miles per hour.
Welcome you back here at America's Morning Headquarters, focusing on the tropics, something that we haven't had to do a lot of here this season. But now we turn to the West Coast for the most impactful system out there.
Yeah, the West Coast. But, you know, Jen and I were looking at the satellite pictures, and the West Coast is connected to the Atlantic when you look at the clouds in the satellite pictures.
This is why we love the weather. It is so interesting. It's so fascinating. It's all connected. And so really, Greg, you got to show the connection between what's happening with Kay on the west, what's happening with Earl in the Atlantic Ocean, and even in between, there's a lower 48 connection.
So if you were a speck of dust floating around just off Southern California, circulating around Tropical Storm Kay, let's say at the jet stream altitude, right? You would probably go along a path like this. You would take a trip down into Mexico, perhaps into Central America, then back up through the Gulf of Mexico and all the way to Hurricane Earl. You would link up. How about that?
That is crazy.
You could tracers are sort of flowing in that route, and that is a remarkable sort of example of how the Atlantic and the Pacific and the whole world, in fact, is connected.
It is all connected. Now, as we look at what's happening out there today, there's, actually impacts from both of these systems in different ways on the U.S. Even Earl, which you think is way out there, it's having an impact.
It is, and it's going to have a significant impact in terms of the beach effects, right? The big waves, rip currents, that kind of thing. Jen, thank you very much. Let's have a look right now at the sort of advisory, the latest advisory from Hurricane Earl. 100 miles per hour in the wind speed, moving rapidly to the northeast at about 16 miles per hour. By the way, there's Bermuda, and we had a fairly close encounter with Hurricane Earl about 6 to 8 hours ago, and the winds reached, well, almost tropical storm force. Sustained winds, at least at Hamilton, got up to the mid to the high 30s with wind gusts closer to 50 miles per hour, which is about what we thought. And there now it's moving away. But I would contend that even looking at Earl right now in these most recent satellite pictures, to me it seems like a rather underdeveloped, compared to the expectation, disheveled, ragged-looking system. It's been able to take advantage of some of the parameters around it. The warm waters, some of the atmospherics around it were supportive of development. But overall, when I look at this, I think this is the kind of hurricane that 2022 is capable of producing, one that looks a little bit like it should be in the far North Atlantic, which is indeed where it's going, and not like a wound-up true tropical cyclone that you might see, let's say, in the MDR or something like that. But anyway, as Jen mentioned, it is having some pretty big impacts, right? Along the East Coast, rip currents and big surf. That is going to be the legacy left behind on the East Coast from Earl as it moves away. And then fairly soon, we got to turn our attention to other systems, Jen and Alex, in the tropics that may become candidates for development.
Join now, James, looking at the weather, but we're also looking back 5 years ago. Boy, storm that scared all of us with its close approach to us.
Yeah, remember we were kind of in the crosshairs again. This is Hurricane Irma. If you weren't here 5 years ago, very tight graze for us here on the east side. And before that, we had Matthew that was a year or so before, and it was just about to our east a little bit. This was just about to the west, but since we were on the right side of the storm, the stronger side, remember, this storm for us just made an absolute mess. There were piles and piles of debris, tree debris left over because we hadn't really stirred things up for quite some time. And there was just so much landscaping and tree debris around. It stuck around through about Thanksgiving. It did, at least for my neighborhood. But it was a hit through the Keys. And of course, they were closed for a little bit. And then right into Marco Island. And then even up towards Orlando had hurricane force wind gusts as that moved on through. Right now, we're not dealing with anything like that. In fact, we have a departing hurricane that's holding its own, 105 mile per hour winds for the 11 o'clock advisory. By tomorrow, it will become extra tropical, meaning it's just going to lose its tropical characteristics and it's just going to be a regular low pressure system up in the North Atlantic. So that will be it tomorrow. We won't see anything. We're down to one area that we're watching now. Remember, we had 3 earlier. Now we're down to 1. This next wave coming off the coast of Africa bears watching as it moves south of the Cabo Verde Islands. But as we go into tomorrow, Tomorrow is the peak of hurricane season. Well, by tomorrow night, we're not even going to have a named storm out there.
We will be watching those southerly winds because as we continue through the next couple of days, we are increasing that rain chance. We do have areas to monitor. Earl, still a Category 2 storm, expected to weaken and move into colder waters as we continue through the next couple of days. And then there's also another area that we're watching down off the Cabo Verde Islands. So Hurricane Earl still bringing some rain showers up into Canada. Otherwise, winds at its core 105 miles per hour, and it's moving northeast at 35 miles per hour. The slower it moves in those colder waters, the faster it's going to fall apart. But you can see it's still going to hold on to that hurricane strength at least through the rest of our morning. This afternoon is when it's expected to turn into that extratropical system, meaning it's becoming a colder storm in the open waters.
Nobody complaining, and I'm standing on a beach in Southern California. Boy, what a wacky year so far. But again, we can keep all the storms away from the beaches, Gulf Coast, East Coast, even here. Nobody is going to complain.
You're right about that. And, you know, we do need the rain in SoCal and some areas nearby, and we're getting some of that. And I think we'll have more later on today before it all kind of winds down by tomorrow. And, you know, the circulation that you were pointing to right there is no longer a tropical cyclone. It once was Category 2K, but it's moved over cooler waters, and that allowed it to disintegrate and is still bringing some impactful weather. It doesn't take much to pose flash flooding problems across parts of California where, you know, annual rainfalls are so small. A little bit can add up very quickly in places that aren't used to seeing it, and we could see some still flooding across the region today, even though for many of us, like for example, that live in the southeast or the northeast or the Midwest, we're like, that doesn't look like much. Trust me. In Southern California, a little bit can be a lot. Even though the winds right now, this good news, are not a factor, the rain still could be, with flood watches out for much of Southern California, Nevada, and also nearby areas of Arizona. This is a future radar showing you the system that was once Hurricane K is winding down even more so hour by hour, but will still bring the threat for maybe some scattered thunderstorms over parts of California today. Generally, the air mass will destabilize, I think, enough to support some isolated storms, and that could produce heavy rain locally. But by tomorrow, all of that should be gone, and we return to more typical conditions for early September.
Today is the peak of hurricane season. There you can see it ramps right up there to September 10th, and then we are on the decline. But we do have a secondary peak in October that is oftentimes a time frame where we see activity here in South Florida. This is what remains of Earl. Earl is now extratropical. It's made that transition, so it does not have deep convection in the core any longer. It will continue to weaken and dissipate as it lifts into the northern Atlantic, and it is moving to the northeast at 10 miles per hour. The only other thing we're watching in the tropics is a wave just moving off the coast of Africa, a 30% chance of development in the next 5 days. For tonight, temps dropping down to 79 degrees. Those storms winding down. Tomorrow, few storms, 92 degrees.